Chapter 2761. Warmth. Since the evil energy in her body had been removed entirely, Di Fui did not want to hide the secret from her anymore. Thus, he explained the situation to her briefly. Gu Shijio was speechless. The evil energy in her body had disappeared, so her mind was now different from before. She was finally able to think clearly and rationally. When she thought of her own clingy attitude over the past few days, she felt even more embarrassed. She bit her lips and replied, "I didn't expect this mother-son venom fetus to be so powerful. I merely touched Little Fox's wrist and was already infected with evil energy. It even attached itself to my baby. That's truly terrible." She looked at the Di Fui again and continued, "You must have been thinking of how to expel the evil energy from me over the last few days, right? No wonder you behaved a bit weird." Di Fui smiled slightly and explained, "The evil energy is a form of spiritual power and could understand people's words. That was why I could not explain everything to you." Gu Shijio nodded in acknowledgement. "I understand." She did not blame him. All of a sudden, she seemed to think of something. "Before How Air came, you wanted to talk about our baby. Were you trying to persuade me to abort her?" Di Fui remained silent. What was her intention of asking him this question? "Shijio, it was the last resort. I really had no other way." Gu Shijio took a deep breath and exhaled. She could understand Di Fui's intention. Perhaps, if Di Hao had not shown up on time, she would have had to sacrifice the baby in her belly. Nonetheless, it really surprised her that Di Hao managed to find a solution even when Di Fui was already willing to opt for the last resort as his answer. How did Di Hao manage to figure it out? Furthermore, he managed to find just the right dragon at the right time. Everything seemed too perfect to be true. "How Air, how did you know that this item can cure the mother-son venom fetus?" Gu Shijio looked at her son curiously. Di Hao was hesitated for a while before answering. "Mother, I have my own ways. It is a heavenly secret, so I can't tell you." After Di Hao became the master of the heavenly law, he accidentally found the legacy left behind by Di Fui and learned about the cure through his work. It turned out that after Di Fui had no choice but to abort Di Shua, the matter had become a thorn in his heart. He was determined to find the solution to it and finally found a method. The method was to use the heart of an aquatic dragon just when it was about to ascend and become an immortal dragon. Of course, he had never tried it before, so Di Fui was only guessing that this method would work. When Di Hao grew up, he used to meet this aquatic dragon that had practiced to become an immortal creature. Di Hao once chatted with it and learned many secrets from it. As it was not easy to become an immortal dragon, this aquatic dragon was so proud to share its story and experience. When Di Hao asked it, it told him about how it practiced and even mentioned the exact date and location where it hid to ascend into an immortal dragon. Of course, it also said to him that its heart was very precious. The purification effect that it possessed was superior to the flesh of Monk Tang. It could improve one's spiritual power and also drive out any evil energy from their bodies. However, the condition was that it had to take out its heart voluntarily. If it were taken by force, the heart would have no effect at all. This dragon was good in nature, and it had a spirit like Monk Tang. It had been keeping a very low profile in the lower bound for 100,000 years. Thus, its life was very lonely, and it had no friends at all. But once it became a dragon, it was finally able to talk freely with people and wished to share about its family background to the people of the lower bound. While listening to its stories, Di Hao learned that it owed a favor to the former Emperor Immortal that it wanted to repay. It also asked Di Hao to help it find the descendants of the former Immortal Emperor and said that it could fulfill any request from the descendant of the former Immortal Emperor as long as it did not cost its own life. At the time, Di Hao never imagined that the information would be useful to him, as he never expected to be able to travel back in time. Perhaps it was destiny, and God also thought that his parents should not have such an ending. Maybe that was why he was given a chance to fix things. Chapter 2762. Warmth 2. Since it was a heavenly secret, Gu Shijio decided not to pry any further. She simply looked at the little Di Hao and then looked back at Di Fui. Her heart skipped a beat. When Di Hao was younger, she didn't pay much attention to his appearance. However, now that he was already a 3-year-old boy, his features were certainly similar to Shinyamo's. The two of them really looked like a family. Nonetheless, Gushijio also noticed that Dihao's eyes and eyebrows were similar to hers. Whenever he smiled, his dimples on his cheeks were also very similar to hers. At that point, Gushijio was still unconvinced that Dihao was their actual son. She had not had a baby before, and was sure that the one in her stomach was her first. To complicate matters further, Dihao seemed to be able to anticipate many unforeseen events. And finally, she knew that she had a special feeling about the kid. In some ways, she felt as though the little boy was her actual son rather than an adopted one. Hence, she wondered if the boy was her son from the future that came back to the past. Gu Zijia's heartbeat raced from then onward. Without hesitation, she raised her hand and pulled Dihao to her side. "Ah, you are from—" Before she could say the word future, Dihao put his finger on her lips. "Mother, you don't have to know where I came from. Just know that I see two of you as my father and mother." His soft finger was cold, and his eyes were blinking at a higher frequency than usual, which obviously signaled her to stop asking any further questions. Fortunately, Gu Shijio was able to pick up the message. She smiled and replied, "Okay, we will treat you as our own son too." At the other end of things, Difui picked up a cup of tea and looked at the boy and his mother who were chatting and laughing. When the sun shone on them, it shimmered a little bit like golden glitter. It was such a picturesque moment that summed up his happiness. This scene might look very ordinary to a passerby, but for him, it was a hard-earned success. Naturally, he wanted this moment to last forever. He would not allow anyone to destroy it. His main cause for concern now was Fan Qianshi. Difui did not know where he was hiding and what he planned to do. However, if he were not removed from the equation, he still remained a significant threat to Difui. The man was the creator of the universe. Thus, his skills were out of this world. At this point, Difui might not even be considered a worthy opponent to him. It would be as though he was using eggs to destroy a rock. The only way he could challenge the man would be to become the master of the heavenly law. But Difui had changed. The man looked at his fingers and wondered if he was still the appropriate master of the heavenly law. He used to take the initiative to attack all of his opponents. In the past, once he found a way to defeat an enemy, he would immediately execute it mercilessly. But now, he was a little bit hesitant. Although he had no memory of being the master of heavenly law, he instinctively felt that once he returned to the position, he would not be able to enjoy such a simple yet warm moment with his kids and beloved wife. Gu Shijio and Difui had gone through many hardships together, and they finally managed to catch a break. If possible, he wanted the present to last as long as possible. He took another look at Gu Shijio and sighed. Swiftly, he made up his mind that it was not the right time for him to make any bold movies. Since Gu Shijio was pregnant, it was not suitable for her to have frequent travels. He should think of their next move only after she gave birth to the baby. As for Fan Qianshi, he would face whatever problems came when the crisis arrived. Happy days always passed very quickly. 5 years had passed, and a starry crescent land had gradually turned prosperous again. Although it was not as prosperous as before, everything was certainly developing in the right direction. Gu Zijia's baby was born in the 2nd year of her pregnancy, and Difui personally helped her to deliver the baby. The little baby was very healthy. As for Dihao, he spent most of his time in the Biwu Palace. He would leave every now and then to run a few errands, but after Di Shiyue was born, Dihao stayed beside her all the time to take care of his sister. When Di Shiyue was born, she was not a genius like Shen Yinma or Dihao. Her primary spiritual power was somewhat low as well. Perhaps this was because of the evil energy that was attached to her in the past. Chapter 2763, Warmth 3. When Difui and Dihao were born, they were already immortals, and their spiritual power was above level 10. They could talk, run, jump, and even use their spiritual power to cast spells right after they were born. Meanwhile, Di Shiyue was an unusually small baby and had a lower spiritual power compared to her family members. On a spectrum, Di Zuyu's growth was more similar to that of a normal child. The only difference was that her progress was slightly faster. During her infancy, she was still weak and always needed people to carry her. But when she was 3 months old, she could sit on her own. When she was 5 months old, she could run. And when she was 6 months old, she started to talk. After she turned 1, Di Fui began to teach her some skills and spells. Unlike with Di Hao, Di Fui and Gu Shijiu got to experience the entire process of raising a child. There were hardships and feelings of lethargy, but there was also a kind of warmth that could not be described. It was very fulfilling for Gu Shijiu to watch the little baby grow up and learn new skills. As for Di Hao, he liked Di Shiyue very much. When Di Shiyue was still learning how to run, he often carried her around with him. After she could run, he often played together with her. Therefore, Di Shiyue always stayed around him like a mini shadow and loved addressing him as her brother. Needless to say, Di Hao enjoyed her presence and appreciated having a younger sister. At this moment, he was older than her. As for the future, that was still a mystery. Di Hao had tried to recall anything he could remember about his family, but strangely, he could not recall any recent memory about his family before he crossed over to the past. Perhaps the fate of his parents and sisters was unknown now, and they would have to re-walk this path that was recreated after so many things had changed. The future could be bright for them or dark. No one knew. He could no longer be the prophet now, so all he could do was to observe and take action step by step. Of course, he also felt that this kind of life was delightful. He could stay with his parents and enjoy their care. He could also be there to watch his cute sister, who should be older than him, grow up and refer to him as her big brother. Everything was good. Perhaps the only thing that made Di Hao somewhat dumbstruck was the fact that he had turned into an adult when he was just 3 years old. However, after he traveled back to the past, it had been nearly 6 years, and he was still a child. He seemed to have only grown a little taller and looked like 7 or 8 years old. It was no different from the growing speed of ordinary children. Was it because something had happened when he crossed over? Or was it because he was always envious of other children who could be spoiled by their parents, so God granted him the chance to spend more time with his parents? In fact, he should not complain about his physique. It did not matter to him that he was a child. What was more important was the spiritual power that he had accumulated over the years. He was now only at the level of a golden immortal. Hence, if he really encountered Fan Qianshi, his only strategy was to run away. As for Di Fui, he was swamped rebuilding the Starry Crescent land. The destruction of the wizardry barrier protecting the land required effort from him and the 4 messengers to restore. Furthermore, the people needed someone they could turn to in times of trouble. Hence, Di Fui had to appear to them as the Lord on several occasions to assure them that the future was bound to be bright. After all, Gu Shijiu was focused on her 2 children. Since there was a perfect Lord available to help her, she was naturally happy to accept the assistance. In fact, she tried to return the position of the Lord to Di Fui several times, but Di Fui firmly rejected it. Therefore, Gu Shijiu had to maintain her status as the Lord of the Starry Crescent Land. However, Di Fui also told her that they would not stay there for too long. Once their children grew up and the situation in the Starry Crescent Land became more stable, he would take them back to the Upper Bound. Chapter 2764. Father was a bad guy after all. The aura in the Upper Bound was significantly more vibrant than the aura in the Lower Bound. It was beneficial for them to cultivate up above. To return to the Upper Bound, they needed to travel through some peculiar place. It was okay for the 3 of them to do so, but not for Di Shiyue. She was too young and needed to be trained to level 9 before she could be brought to the Upper Bound with her parents. Of course, the Starry Crescent Land could not be without its lord for long periods of time. So, they still had to come back once every 6 months until the next lord was appointed. According to the heavenly law, Gu Shijiu needed to be the lord for 10,000 years before the next lord would appear. However, when Di Shiyue had turned 4, Di Fui noticed signs of a new lord through examining the starry array. The odd thing about it was that the new lord seemed to be currently outside of the Starry Crescent Land. Despite his genuine attempt to figure out the identity of the individual, Fui's efforts were futile. Nonetheless, he was not worried. Since this star had already appeared, the other party would inevitably arise in 100 years or so and take over the position from Gu Shijio. By then, they could completely get rid of this burden. 100 years was not too long. They could afford to wait for it. Although Di Zuyu's qualifications were not outstanding, she was also a brilliant child. She was like a sponge that absorbed knowledge very quickly. Her main disadvantage was that she was more timid and playful than they had envisioned. She was not serious in her cultivation and automatically retreated whenever she encountered difficult situations. She would even scream and cry whenever she saw a cockroach. And once she got scolded for being afraid, she would try to act like a cute little girl. If she were an average child, Di Fui would be somewhat impressed by her. He just wondered how she turned out to be so average and timid. Because of this characteristic of hers, Di Shiyue was often punished by Di Fui. The man had trained countless disciples, so he was experienced in teaching. When he was reincarnated as Shun Yinma, he suffered under Shun Juli's guidance, so naturally, he was a strict teacher. Of course, Di Fui and Shun Juli had very different characters, so their teaching methods were also different. In the past, Shun Juli treated Di Fui like a sheep. He often threw Di Fui into the wizardry barrier and let him explore it and grow on his own. Shun Juli was rigorous and has compiled a lot of secrets for his son to learn systematically. On the other hand, Di Fui preferred to train his daughter as opposed to dumping her into foreign lands to find her own way. For example, Di Shiyue was somewhat fearful of heights, so she did not want to practice the flying skills taught to her by Di Fui. Gu Shijio forced her several times, but she cried so hard while hugging her leg. She cried pitifully, asserting that she was still a baby and that people her age should be pampered instead of being forced into such difficult situations. Di Shiyue had a lovely face with big round eyes, long eyelashes, and a small mouth. She was as cute as a Barbie doll. Therefore, it was difficult to stay mad at her when she cried. Even hard-hearted people would become soft-hearted. Getting this girl was not easy, so Gu Shijio still pampered her a lot. It was a bit unbearable to see her crying so hard. Thus, she did not force her practice. However, after Di Fui knew about this, he just smiled at his daughter. Shiyue, let father take you to the clouds to have stroll. He casually spoke about the scenery in the clouds, which successfully evoked the kid's interest. Di Shiyue opened her small arms to let him carry her, so he took off with his daughter and went straight to the sky. While holding her safely in his arms, he used the opportunity to test her knowledge about the ability to fly. Chapter 2765. Father was a bad guy, too. Di Shiyue answered all his questions as she was very familiar with the theory of flying. She could respond well, so Di Fui was very satisfied. After that, he let her experience the scenery in the sky and raised his hand to make the clouds change into various shapes. Elephants, birds, lions, and tigers. It could turn into anything that made her giggle very happily. While she was excitedly playing with the cloud-like animals, Di Fui asked her which animal she liked the most, and she pointed to the dapeng bird. Therefore, Di Fui patted her head. Good girl, let's fly on it. All of a sudden, he threw Di Shiyue to the dapeng. However, this dapeng was made up of clouds, so naturally, it could not support Di Shiyue. Hence, Di Shiyue found herself falling like a cannonball from the sky. She was so scared and cried all the way down. She thought that her father would fly down to rescue her. It was completely beyond her expectations that the man would simply smile at her from above. Good girl, you can do it. Fly. With that image in mind, Di Shiyue no longer wasted her time hoping that her father would rescue her. She did not want to crash into the ground and hurt herself. Desperately, she adjusted her body instinctively and used the flying technique that her mother had taught her. Alas, she landed on her buttocks. She was hurt and scared at the same time. Hence, she only continued crying. Her father finally flew down to her but kept himself above the ground. He patiently watched her cry and even invited her to do so more loudly, saying that it would give a better effect. This action made little Shiyue so angry. To get revenge, she decided to stop crying at once. She blamed the father for being biased, because she did not see him train Di how like this before. The two of them even often discussed things together and went out to work together. Most of the time, little Shiyue could not understand their conversation, which made her feel somewhat jealous of being excluded. Di Fui did not interrupt her and let her vent all her dissatisfaction. When she finally stopped, he asked, "Is that all?" Di Shiyue did not expect to hear these 3 words despite already complaining so much. Her father's nonchalance really stunned her. To continue to show that she was angry, she nodded and said, "Yes, that's all. Father, you are indeed biased. Mother used to say that men in this generation are always biased. I did not expect you to be the same." Di Fui pondered on what she had said and nodded. "After listening to you, I think I was indeed somewhat biased." Again, Di Shiyue was caught off guard by her father's response. She did not expect him to admit his mistake so easily. Feeling justified, she became even bolder. "Then, father, you should change." Di Fui rolled up his sleeves and pulled her into his arms. "Well, I will try to change." He carried Di Shiyue and flew up again. Di Shiyue saw that her father admitted his mistake, so she generously said that if her father changed, he was a good father, and she would still love him very much. However, before she could finish speaking, her father had tossed her again. Since she already had an awful past experience, she could quickly pull herself together despite initially screaming at him. This time, she managed to land on her own. Father lied to her. Father was a bad guy. Di Shiyue did not cry anymore. She turned around and ran toward her mother. She did not want this deceiving father who liked to bully her. However, her short little legs could not outrun her father's sleeves. In just a brief moment, she was caught and pulled back up into the sky. Di Shiyue was crying in his arms all the way up and criticized the man for being dishonest. Chapter 2766. Father was a bad guy. 3. Di Fui smiled coldly. "Why do you believe others so easily? Since you do, you deserve to be deceived. I'm a trickster that enjoys deceiving others. Instead of letting you go out into the world and be deceived by others, it would be better for you to help me cure my addiction or at least quench my thirst in this aspect. And today, no matter how much you cry, you have to practice the flying technique, or you can forget about going home. My favorite pastime is to spend my time with a crying child. When I see you cry, I have a sense of accomplishment." Di Shiyue was speechless. She finally realized that she could not escape. Her best option was to face her fear and practice. She also did not want her father to drop her from the sky again to force her to find her footing on the way down. Therefore, she chose to comply with him and practice flying. After trying again and again, she finally mastered the art of flying. She could now fly very fast, yet steadily. Di Fui had spent the entire day with her and was pleased to see her making progress. Whenever he saw her practicing on her own, he rewarded her by giving her some fruits and toys. Nonetheless, Di Shiyue was rather stubborn and was not ready to forgive her father. She was still angry at him the entire time. Although she had been starving the whole day, she was too proud to accept his toys and fruits. As a result, her father put them away, patted her little head, and praised her for being tough. Instead of pampering her, he asked her to continue being tough. Di Shiyue was so angry that she could not help but shed a few tears. The little girl took the opportunity to threaten her father by telling him that she would go home and complain to her mother about the way he had been treating her. However, this place was thousands of miles away from home. With her current skills, she could not fly back, so naturally, her mother could not save her from this torture. Thus, her words were purely meant as an empty threat. As expected, her father was not afraid. He did not comfort her and just let her continue crying. In typical fashion, he patted her head and told her to look for him when she was all cried out. He was going to take a dip in the ocean and catch some fish. If she cried long enough, he would cook some fish for her for dinner. Alas, Di Shiyue finally understood that crying was not going to get her out of the situation. Nonetheless, the misery was just overwhelming for her, so she continued to sob slightly longer on her own. Di Fui really left her to go fishing at the lake. He would let this girl cry until the place flooded if she wanted. All the crying only added to Di Zuyu's hunger. She was starving, but could not win her father's sympathy and compassion. That drove her to feel angry and annoyed as well. After some time, she suddenly smelled the taste of grilled fish from a distance. That was the last straw for her. In the end, she just ran over to her father and grabbed one of the fishes that he was grilling without uttering a single word. Di Fui did not stop her, but he looked at her very interestingly. I thought you were adamant that you did not want anything from me. Why are you taking my fish? Di Zuyu's simply took a mouthful of fish without entertaining her father. How much was her pride worth after all? How important was it for her to be tough? When she needed to be soft, she had to do so for her own benefit. Otherwise, she would be at a disadvantage. After spending almost the entire day together, Di Shiyue understood this theory and realized the malice that exists in the world. When the little girl returned, Gu Shiju realized that she was better behaved. She did not cry that frequently and had overcome her fear of heights. What surprised her from the beginning was that Di Shiyue had flown back home. Naturally, the little girl was exhausted. The moment she returned, she plunged herself into Gu Zijia's arms, asking for love and comfort. She even bit her lips and complained about the way her father had treated her. She wanted to cry, but she had cried too much over the past 2 days. Her tear glands were empty. To add to her misery, she saw her father smiling at her from a distance, so she chose not to cry anymore. Chapter 2767. Father was a bad guy for she was so tired and exhausted that she even cried in her sleep and flailed her arms and legs around unconsciously. Although she had her own room, after she fell asleep, Di Fui came over and gently massaged her small arms and legs to soothe her muscles and eliminate her fatigue. When the massage was over, he got up from the bed and looked up to find Gu Shijio with folded arms leaning against the door frame and staring at him. He could tell from her eyes alone that she was smiling. The couple left their kid's room and returned to their bedroom. Gu Shijio looked at him and commented, "Shiyue hates you now. You should let her know that you gave her a massage." Di Fui shook his head. "She is too delicate. If she knew that I would be soft-hearted with her, it would be difficult to train her later on. Why are you so eager to keep pushing her? In fact, she is already doing well." Di Fui pulled her toward him and placed her on his lap. "Shijio, she is our child, so she is destined to experience more storms. I don't want her to suffer from losses in the future. The better she can get from her practice, the easier it will be for her to protect herself." Gu Shijio actually advocated strict education for children as she did not want her daughter to grow like a flower that required protection. Although Fan Qianshi had not reappeared yet, in Gu Zijia's heart, this was a knife hanging over her head. She did not know when the knife would fall, but once it did, there would surely be a bloody storm. She was not afraid for herself, but was worried about the 2 children. Thinking about him made her hold Di Fui's waist and bury her head on his chest. However, what she uttered next was somewhat contradictory. "I feel that we will be able to keep her safe with our skills." Di Fui raised his hand and rubbed her hair. "Shijio, sooner or later, our kids will need to be independent. We can't protect her forever. She should be strong on her own. This child should have died, but she survived, so it was actually against destiny. Her future was bound to be more difficult. The sooner she became stronger, the less danger she would be in." Hence, what Di Fui said was reasonable, so Gu Shijio gave the task of training little Shiyue to Di Fui. The next morning, when little Shiyue woke up, she thought that she could get a hug from her mother, but ended up being dismayed as she was forced out of the residence sorrowfully by her father. She tried to ask her mother for help, but her mother did not help her this time. Instead, she waved her hand at her little girl and said, "Baby, you can do it. You are the best." Di Shiyue wanted to cry again. It seemed that her mother did not care about her anymore. As for her brother, Di Hao, who had always been very protective of his sister, he also smiled and waved his fist in the air to cheer her on. Apparently, no one was going to help her this time. She finally accepted her fate to be trained by her father, the smiling, evil tiger. Gu Shijio watched the 2 of them leave and then looked at Di Hao, who was beside her. She held her son's little hand and wanted to go back into the house, but soon realized that her son's little hand was ice cold, as if it had just been pulled out from the snow. She frowned. "Why is your hand so cold? Are you unwell?" Instinctively, she raised her hand and touched his forehead, but discerned that his temperature was normal. She was not at ease, so she checked his pulse, but did not find anything wrong. Di Hao withdrew his hand and said casually, "I am all right. I just went to the top of the hill and had snowball fights with the muscle." Gu Shijio was less worried for a moment until she realized something abnormal about her child. It had been several years since Di Hao last grew taller. Although he looked like a 7 or 8 years old boy, which was his approximate age, Gu Shijio felt that something was not right. If his genes were as good as his father's, he should look like a teenager once he turned 3. Was his growth hindered by the fact that they were at the lower bound? Or was he being manipulated remotely by Fan Qianshi? Chapter 2768. In the dream, she pondered over the possibility and looked at her son again. Di Hao was now at the level of a golden immortal, but somehow his progress seemed to have been halted. His abilities should have reached a higher milestone, but it seemed to be bound by something. "However, come with me." She wanted to test her son's martial arts, so she took her to the practice arena. Coincidentally, Mu Feng and the 3 messengers were also practicing there. They had been really hardworking of late and had all turned into immortals after having experienced a catastrophe. Although they each had the opportunity to ascend to the upper bound, they were reluctant to leave their masters. Hence, they all stay behind. The 4 messengers could imagine the lifestyle and culture in the upper bound from the way Gu Shijio and Di Fui described it. If they were to choose to ascend in their current state, they would be considered very low-ranking immortals up there. Needless to say, that was also a deterring factor, as they did not want to go up and get embarrassed. Therefore, they had been practicing very hard down here in hopes that one day they will be able to ascend with their masters and be in a better position. As Gu Shijio and Di Hao approached the arena, Gu Shijio told them that she was here to test his kung fu. This made Mu Feng and the rest very intrigued, so they wanted to observe the practice at the side. Di Hao was a bright kid. When he arrived at the arena, he already knew what his mother wanted to do. Nonetheless, he paused for a moment to think about the last time he was in a battle. After he retrieved the dragon's heart, he realized that his skills grew exceptionally slowly. Also, whenever he practiced, his entire body would ache severely as if some devil was possessing him. He thought to himself that it was perhaps his punishment for changing the course of events. He did not want his mother to worry, so he never said anything, but Di Fui had noticed everything over time. Over the past few days, Di Fui has been trying to regulate his bodily functions. The man had used all kinds of secret techniques, but the effect was not visible. Fortunately, because he looked young, the slow growth of his skills would not create any suspicion among the people around him. His father was the only one that noticed something unusual. As for Gu Shijio, she knew too little about her son's abilities to be able to assess whether something had changed. Furthermore, since Di Shiyue was still very young, she had paid most of her attention to her daughter instead of her son. After all, Di Hao was not one to cling on to people. In fact, he spent more time with Di Fui than with Gu Shijio. Therefore, she had not noticed her son's anomaly even though it had been present for a while. If she did not feel how cold his hand was from before, she would not have paid much attention to him. Di Hao looked at his mother, knowing that she was growing suspicious. If he did not fight with her, she would probably become anxious about his well-being. In trying to think of a plan, he paused and looked at her pitifully. "Mother, I am now at the bottleneck stage of my practice. My skills have declined a lot. Please show mercy to me." Gu Shijio could not help but laugh. Rest assured, of course, it was never her plan to hurt her son. With the exchange of pleasantries, the two of them started to fight. As expected, the fight was certainly exciting. Gu Shijio learned that although her son's spiritual power was not too high, his tricks were extraordinarily fierce and potent. They could often exert a powerful effect with only minimal spiritual power. It could be said that this kind of skill would magnify his limited spiritual power to its most significant extent. Personally, Gu Shijio had never seen those moves before. In fact, since she started off a little slower than she was capable, initially, the fight was not in her favor. Diha's swordsmanship was incredibly brilliant, and his moves were very sophisticated. By looking at the speed and angle of his moves, he was definitely a master. Without at least 100 years of practice, he would definitely not be able to reach this level. What was the actual age of her son before he crossed over? Gu Shijio got distracted while pondering the possibilities and subconsciously defended her son's attack with too much force. As a result, the sword was thrown out of Dihao's grasp. Chapter 2769. In the dream, too, Dihao's palm was hurt and it bled. Meanwhile, Gu Shijio deeply regretted her earlier distraction. She wanted to heal him quickly. However, Dihao retreated before she could get close to him. "No, mother. It is just a minor injury. I will be all right. Oh yeah, I have not finished the homework father gave me earlier. I need to go now." Then, he sneaked away without giving Gu Shijio a chance to stop him. The thought of him leaving did not really bother Gu Shijio. After all, this child was generally very tough. Nonetheless, Gu Shijio could not help but laugh at the thought of her daughter, who was on the opposite end of the spectrum. Her daughter was gentle like a princess. She would scream and cry at the slightest injury. Gu Shijio wondered whose genes she carried. Now she was taken away by Di Fui to be trained. She would undoubtedly suffer and cry a lot. Gu Shijio shook her head just thinking about it. Although she was somewhat distressed for her daughter, the lady was extremely sensible and could think rationally. She knew that her daughter would be all right. She remembered the time when she was trained by Di Fui too. Although he was very strict, he had so many tricks that made the training rather interesting. The process was a mix of happiness and pain. After all, Di Fui's abilities were simply unfathomable. Hence, there was no doubt that Gu Shijio had improved tremendously under his tutelage. While reflecting on the training she received from Di Fui, Gu Shijio recalled the tricks used by her son earlier. She definitely found his attacks to be very unique, and as a person who was crazy about martial arts, whenever she saw a new skill, she would like to study it. Her son's swordsmanship reminded her of the solitary sword that Ling Hu Chong practiced in the story Dash, Swordsman. In the story, Ling Hu Chong found himself injured to the point where he was not able to stand properly. However, with a sword in his hand, no one could even get close to him. He could kill people as easily as cutting vegetables. Gu Shijio somehow felt that Dihao seemed to possess a similar trait. Given her unparalleled memory, Gu Shijio was generally good at remembering the moves of her opponents. However, she found Dihao's moves to be rather complicated to recall precisely. Either that, or there was a mysterious force attached to his fighting that prevented people from being able to remember his moves clearly. Nonetheless, Gu Shijio could still remember part of it, so she decided to practice those moves until the rest of it came back to her memory. Mu Feng and the three other messengers had a strange feeling about the fight. It was even worse for them, as Dihao's moves were like magic. They could not understand how he did each move and also could not remember what he did. Hence, they were very impressed when they saw Gu Shijio attempting to replicate it. Her dress fluttered in the wind, which made the scene look rather awe-inspiring. After an hour, Dihao returned to the practice arena and saw that Gu Shijio was still there and practicing her swordsmanship. He was stunned and decided to pay attention to what she was doing. The more he watched, the more shocked he became. It seemed that his mother was able to almost replicate his every move in its entirety. What she lacked was practice. It was indeed remarkable that Gu Shijio actually remembered the steps that only the master of the heavenly law was supposed to know. Other than her, no one else knew how to practice the same way that the master of the heavenly law did. It would not be surprising to Dihao if Di Fui could remember the moves, as he had probably learned it before at some point in his life. However, Gu Shijio was only the lord of the Starry Crescent Land. How did she manage to bypass the heavenly laws and achieve such a feat? Even though her moves still needed to be refined, Dihao already found it amazing. Who was his mother? What was her original identity? How could she have this strange ability? Dihao found himself in deep thought just watching her. Di Fui did not come back that night, so Di Hao carried a pillow and went into his mother's bedroom. "Mother, can I sleep with you tonight?" Gu Shijio felt guilty for not paying much attention to her kid lately, so naturally, she would not refuse. She patted her bed and invited him. "Come up." Chapter 2770. In the dream, 3. As it was rare for Di Fui to be away, Gu Shijio took the opportunity to chat with her son under the quilt. She checked his little hand and found that his injured palm had healed entirely. There was not even a scar left behind. Finally, Gu Shijio was very relieved. She comfortably chatted along with her son and wanted to ask him more about the future. However, Di Hao looked very sleepy and even yawned a few times during their conversation. He looked a bit pale, so she could not bear to keep him up with any further questions. Di Hao rolled into her arms and said, "Mother, can you hug me to sleep? You have never put me to sleep before." The boy sounded rather pitiful, which made Gu Shijio feel bad as well. She had ignored her son too long. This son was rarely so clingy, so Gu Shijio did not want to reject him. She hugged him in her arms and replied, "Sure, I will hug you to sleep." Perhaps it was because she was hugging her son, but Gu Shijio actually fell asleep very soon after she hugged him. Her breathing grew heavier, and she lost consciousness. Meanwhile, Di Hao slowly opened his eyes while in her arms and quietly looked at her for a moment. Then, he gradually extended his small hand to pinch a strange spell. There was a pale, purple light at his fingertips all of a sudden, and he put his soft fingers on Gu Zijia's temple. Swiftly, the purple light glowed around her body and covered it entirely. Gu Shijio had a dream. The earth that she envisioned in her dream was strange and desolate, with hardly any life. There were many deep trenches on the ground that did not seem to exist naturally, but looked as though a strong force created them. Seeing the barren land made Gu Shijio sad, as many living things seemed to have perished. The sound on a thunderous battle could be heard somewhere in the distance in front of Gu Shijio. The sky was flashing with lights while the sound of thunder was raging through the air. The ground was shaking as if an earthquake with a magnitude of 10 occurred. The scarce fragile vegetation that Gu Shijio saw had been uprooted, making the land even more desolate. She squinted her eyes to focus her vision and noticed that there was a group of people who were killing each other somewhere ahead of her. To be precise, 3 people were being chased by a group of orcs. These 3 people seemed to be a couple and child, and the child was about 3 or 4 years old. When Gu Shijio arrived, the couple had been seriously injured and were dying. Nonetheless, the child seemed to be safe. There was only a split wound on the child's small arm, and it was not serious. Gu Shijio frowned as she magically retrieved a white sword in her palm. She attacked the group of orcs at once. She was skilled at wielding a sword, and her attacks could typically destroy an entire mountain. Hence, those orcs did not have any chance to fight back. After a few were killed, the leader shrieked and commanded the rest of his clan to run away. The couple survived. They struggled to get up to thank Gu Shijio, as they could not even summon the strength to do so. The 2 of them seemed to be on the verge of dying, and Gu Shijio could not save them. The couple seemed to know this too. They only desperately stared at their child and said, "Please, please take care." He pointed his finger at the child when he died. The woman seemed to want to say something, but she was too weak to talk. Her eyes rolled upward. Then, she went along with her husband. The child got out from under the woman's arms and looked at the dead couple. Then, he looked back at Gu Shijio. He did not cry, but just stood there awkwardly. Gu Shijio looked at the boy. He was a lovely boy, and his talent was excellent. She immediately thought of taking him as her apprentice. She looked down at him and asked, "What's your name? Are you willing to recognize me as your teacher?" Chapter 2771. The creator of the universe, the kid, was stunned and immediately raised his head. "I will not easily worship a master." Based on his reply, he seemed to be a rather proud individual. Perhaps having him as an apprentice was a gift. Gu Shijio raised her eyebrows slightly as she was surprised. She did not like to force people to do something they did not want to do. In fact, she was not looking for an apprentice. However, she was able to spot the child's talent. So she came up with a suggestion. Since the child seemed reluctant, she was too lazy to pursue the matter further. She nodded her head and sighed. "You are an ambitious boy. You don't have to recognize me as your master." She turned away and left. What was the world was like now? God, immortals, devils, beasts, humans, and perhaps even ghosts coexisted. They fought with each other and brought chaos to the entire world. Gu Shijio was determined to find out why all this had happened. She did not know why she lost a lot of her skills as well and was left with less than 20% of her spiritual power. Originally, her skills were at the level of a great deity, but now she was just about the same as a lowly immortal. The child never thought that she would turn and leave. He was stunned for a moment as everything happened so swiftly. The child merely bit his lips but did not chase after her. He looked around and saw the different beings fighting against one another. The immortals did not like the demons, and in return, the demons wanted to get rid of the immortals too. The humans looked down on the ghosts, and the ghosts often harmed humans whenever they could. As for the orcs, they would side with whoever is beneficial to them. They would sell their loyalty to whoever was most powerful. They had bodies as hard as copper and bones as sturdy as iron. They had endless strength and power to move mountains and reclaim the sea. They were also the race that every ethnic wanted to kill. To conquer the world, these races fought crazily and developed a deep hatred for one another. Once they encountered each other, they would start to battle until the day ended or one party died. While Gu Shijio walked around to study the area, she had intercepted more than 10 battles. She was somehow tired from all these interventions and did not quite understand why the world had become so strange to her. Before she went to sleep, everything was fine. All ethnic groups could live together in peace. Now, they were all segregated and against each other. Suddenly, something was stirring in front of her. Several figures seemed to be on their way to do something, but as soon as they saw Gu Shijio, who was squatting on the roadside, they stopped. Countless eyes fell on her. Gu Shijio frowned. These people were all big and round. Some of them had long horns on their heads, and others had scales on them. Although they were humanoids, they were obviously orcs at their core. Among them was a kid. That kid was the proud little guy that she had encountered before. At this moment, he was carried by a tiger-faced big man. Apparently, he was a prisoner. When the kid saw Gu Shijio, his eyes lit up slightly. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to call for help, but decided not to say anything. A few of the fights that Gu Shijio encountered were related to the orcs, so she was having a headache when she saw them. Frankly, she did not like them very much. However, what even more disturbing to her was the fact that these orcs were only covered with a piece of animal skin on their body. When they were watching her, the thing at their crotch area had actually straightened up. The tiger-faced leader threw the kid into the hands of one of the other orcs and then rushed to her with slobber drooling down his face. Such a beautiful little fairy. Come with us. Gu Shijio was speechless. She unsheathed her sword at once. Chapter 2772. The Creator of the Universe, 2. Although her spiritual power was not as good as before, her ability to wield a sword still remained. Once her sword was in her grasp, she was invincible. The skills possessed by this group of orcs were much better than those that she had encountered before. Nonetheless, they were not her true opponents. After a short melee, 5 out of the 8 orcs were killed by her. Initially, Gu Shijio was compassionate and did not want to end their lives unnecessarily. However, they were too cumbersome to deal with after a while. They often used horny words to tease her in the fight, and even used low-class tricks to attack her, such as attacking her chest. It was a disgrace to keep such creatures in the world. Therefore, she made up her mind to eliminate them all. The remaining 3 orcs realized that they were not able to challenge her, so they suddenly had an idea and used the kid as a hostage to force Gu Shijio to surrender. Gu Shijio glanced at the kid and asked, "Who's he? Why would I surrender myself because of him?" The leopard-faced orc, who was holding the kid, seemed to be a bit surprised. "You don't know him? He is the most wanted person in the 6 realms. Even your Emperor Immortal is desperately looking for him." We are bringing him to your celestial kingdom as a wager. Why do they want him? Gu Shijio glanced at the kid's face and wondered. He is the most talented person in the world. No matter which faction gets him as their apprentice, it would be a great achievement. In the future, he might be able to unify the 6 realms. The leopard-faced orc then placed his sharp claws on the kid's neck. The Emperor Immortal specifically ordered us to keep this kid alive. Whoever hurts him is an enemy of the whole celestial kingdom. How daring are you to go against the Emperor Immortal's will? Gu Shijio folded her arms and replied, since hurting him makes one an enemy of the whole celestial kingdom. What are you doing now? Are you planning to tickle him? The leopard-faced orc snorted. Our orcs naturally do not have to follow the will of your emperor. Even if we kill this little guy, the Emperor Immortal will not dare to give us a difficult time. Gu Shijio looked at them casually and continued, what is your request? The 3 orcs felt that she finally felt threatened, so they all breathed a sigh of relief. They originally just wanted her to spare their lives. But now, they wanted more. They asked Gu Shijio to break one of her arms, and then kowtow 3 times to them. Gu Shijio chuckled. I originally thought that this kid was useful enough to spare your lives. However, you missed the opportunity to save yourself. Such a waste. In an instant, Gu Shijio seemed to disappear in front of their eyes in a flash. The 3 male orcs had not seen her reappear, yet before they saw 1,000 stars in front of their eyes. All 3 of them fell to the ground. The leopard-faced orc still had some sense left in him. Before he died, he used his sharp nails to scratch the kid. The orc's nails were obviously poisonous, so the kid's face instantly turned blue. After Gu Shijio settled the orcs, she pulled the kid over and treated his wound for him. After her fingers touched his wound, the poison was automatically dissolved. The kid seemed to still hold a grudge against Gu Shijio for abandoning him earlier. He bit his lips and proudly said, now that you know who I am, even if you heal for me, I will not necessarily worship you as my master. Unless, Gu Shijio did not need to hear the rest. So she said, I do not plan to take you as my apprentice anyway. The kid was stunned and opened his mouth slightly. He could not believe her. Liar. Humph. Are you trying to fool me? Was this kid so proud of himself? Nonetheless, since everyone in the 6 realms was fighting for him, perhaps he had the right to think of himself that way. Chapter 2773. The Creator of the Universe. 3. Gu Shijio genuinely did not want to accept the boy as her apprentice. After all, this kid was obviously stubborn and not easy to be trained. To avoid wasting any more time, Gu Shijio patted his shoulder, turned, and left. The kid was stunned for a moment, and finally realized that the other party really did not want to accept him as an apprentice. He thought about what had happened for a while, and decided to catch up with Gu Shijio. He stopped right in front of her and said, since you have saved me twice, I can tell you my name. There is no need. I am not interested. The kid's face turned green. It was probably his first time being rejected so many times by the same person. He raised his voice as Gu Shijio continued to walk away. Since I said that I want to tell you, I must keep my promise. I am Qianshi. That's a nice name. Good for you. Gu Shijio patted his head, turned, and left. The boy really could not believe that Gu Shijio had no interest in him at all. He watched her back as she walked away and stamped his foot on the ground. Hey, little fairy, what is your name? When I get stronger in the future and dominate the 6 realms, I will repay you for what you have done today and promote you. This kid spoke like he was giving her the greatest gift in the future. He made it sound like it was only a matter of time for him to be the ruler of the 6 realms. It was likely that the kid's ego had been inflated after being pursued by everyone to be his apprentice. Frankly, he was an excellent seed to sow and nurture, but he was simply too arrogant. If he continued to behave this way, the end result would be bad. After listening to his last sentence, Gu Shijio stopped abruptly. The idea of accepting him as her apprentice lingered again in her mind. She thought that since he was the creator of the universe, it was her responsibility to direct this kid in the right way since he might affect the future of the 6 realms. Slowly, she turned around and asked, Qianshi, I will ask you once again, do you want to worship me as your master? Having heard that question, the child immediately turned arrogant again. He raised his chin highly, thinking to himself that the lady had just been pretending to walk away. Little fairy, although your kung fu is very high, you are not qualified to be my master. I will only consider it if you are willing to listen to me and follow my commands. You have to know that if you take me as your apprentice, I can help to promote you to the highest position in the celestial kingdom. Even the Emperor Immortal will look up to you. He stopped before he finished his sentence because Gu Shijiu raised her hand and touched his head. Qianshi, you are in dire need of medication. I have given you a chance. It's fine if you don't want to take it. She no longer cared about him and directly teleported away. The kid was speechless. He could sense that he had missed an excellent opportunity. He couldn't help but shout, "Who are you?" No one answered him. He clenched his fists in disappointment and said to himself, I will go to the celestial kingdom and worship the most powerful immortal as my teacher. Little fairy, I will make you kneel at my feet. The 6 realms were in a state of chaos. It was so bad to the point where it was suffocating. It was impossible for Gu Shijiu to use her current strength to restore the world to its previous condition. Everything had to wait until she could restore her abilities. Therefore, Gu Shijiu isolated herself in a valley so that she could cultivate and restore her spiritual power as quickly as possible. Because of the continuous war in the 6 realms, all the lands were damaged by natural disasters, such as hurricanes, as well as fierce battles. It was also the same in the valley in which Gu Shijiu had isolated herself. The once lush forest was now destroyed by war, and the minimal vegetation on was now even more scarce. Flowers became a rare species. Nonetheless, after staying here for some time, Gu Shijiu seemed to have rekindled her own purifying aura. She had automatically purified the suffocated air swirling in the valley to the point where a clear sky was revealed on top of her. Wherever she went, steam seemed to travel with her around her body that moistened everything to the point where the bare mountains began to sprout again with vegetation. There was colorful, auspicious air rising out of the valley. Chapter 2774. The Creator of the Universe. 4. The greenery began to spread farther and farther. In the end, the land within 1,000 miles from where she was standing began to regain its vitality. Dihao looked at his mother, who was asleep, and his fingers that were covered in light shivered slightly. He looked shocked. He used a special technique that enabled him to find out the origin of a person by tracing their ancestry. Now, he finally found out the origin of his mother. She was the creator of the universe. Although he could only see pictures from her dream, he could already tell her identity as he saw the bright, auspicious aura that breathed life into the area. He was sure of her identity. The creator of the universe could bring vitality to everything. Therefore, there would be flowers and plants present wherever she went. Dihao had become aware of this knowledge when he became the master of the heavenly law. He was wondering at the time, how would such a person like Fan Qianshi could be the creator of the universe? Apparently, he had self-proclaimed himself to be the creator of the universe, or had taken over the position from the original candidate. There was only one way for the latter to occur, which was that the original creator of the universe had immortalized. Dihao took a light breath and continued to think about this matter. Even his father, as the former master of heavenly law, did not know about this because he always believed that Fan Qianshi was the creator of the universe and often played chess with him. Why did his mother immortalize? How could she become a clone? Furthermore, since the kid in her dream was undoubtedly Fan Qianshi, did he ever worship the original creator of the universe as his master? How did he become her successor? Numerous questions were spinning around in Dihao's mind. He decided to cast another spell to continue watching everything unfold. He saw that Gu Shijiu set up a wizardry barrier in the valley and practiced very hard. There was once when she finally made a breakthrough in her practice, but she could not muzzle the auspicious aura that came from her body. It was so strong to the point where the auspicious aura broke through her wizardry barrier and rose to the sky. This was a sensitive matter to the celestial kingdom. When someone saw it, They quickly reported it to the Emperor Immortal. At that time, Emperor Immortal was delighted by the arrival of Qianshi. He held a grand banquet in the Celestial Kingdom to welcome the little boy. He wanted to find a good master for Qianshi to nurture his talent, so that one day he would be able to bring glory to the Celestial Kingdom. As expected, Qianshi had extremely high requirements. He only wanted to worship the strongest person in the Celestial Kingdom. To be sure that the selected person was the strongest, he wanted them to battle each other and prove the status. Therefore, the banquet turned out to be a contest in which all the masters in the Celestial Kingdom found themselves on a battle platform. But in the midst of the matches, there was a spy who came to report the auspicious aura seen in the sky. This matter was very significant, so the Emperor Immortal immediately followed the spy to observe the auspicious aura. After seeing its shape and form, his facial expression changed slightly. He seemed to be happy and somewhat stunned as well. This is the work of the creator of the universe. Is a creator awakened? The other immortals looked at each other for an explanation. Some of them could not help but ask, is there a creator of the universe? I always thought it was all a myth. Yeah, I haven't seen him in the past 10,000 years. It turns out that he was not immortalized yet. Was he just asleep this whole time? Most of the immortals made their speculations. However, Qianshi, who had been quiet the whole time, suddenly shouted, I want to worship the creator of the universe as my teacher. Then, he turned around and rushed down to the scene. The immortals looked at each other and were confused as to what to do next. Meanwhile, the Emperor Immortal said in a serious tone, the creator of the universe is awakening. It is a blessing to the 6 realms. I shall go and visit. He led the crowd together to the lower bound. Chapter 2775. The servant boy and the disciple, a fragrant flower-blossoming scent circled the valley. The clear water and the emerald hills made for pleasant scenery that was pleasing to the eye. Once the Emperor Immortal dismissed the dark clouds that obscured his view, the entire valley was revealed, creating strong contrasts as compared to the barren land beyond the valley. By the river, there was a thatched cottage of green willow leaves. Wildflowers blossomed on the roof, creating a rustic charm. The 6 worlds were completely chaotic. There were fights every day, even between the immortals. The chaos led to noisy and smoke-filled lands everywhere. The situation was so bad that a miasma of smog covered up the entire sky. Life began to wither, making the celestial world a place of desolation. Nothing was able to grow on the infertile land. The Emperor Immortal wanted to make the place look better, so he created flowers with his spiritual power. However, the flowers were artificial, so although the view looked amazing from afar, the flowers looked synthetic from up close. Therefore, the immortals had not seen such spectacular views of mountain scenes in a very long while. Even Qianshi was surprised. Soon, someone emerged from the thatched cottage, and as soon as Qianshi saw who the person was, he felt his jaw involuntarily dropping. A woman gracefully walked emerged from the cottage with her hair flowing naturally, gently caressing her emerald green dress. Her exquisite features matched the ethereal gracefulness in every step that she took, made for an unforgettable countenance for all of them. Her grace was clearly a marvel from nature's own hand. Her beauty took all of their breaths away. The women who witnessed the scene were ashamed of their appearances. Meanwhile, the men were all at a loss for words. The woman locked her gaze at the Emperor Immortal and said, Guan Shao, it has been a while. Guan Shao was the name of the current Emperor Immortal in Gu Zijia's dream. Slowly, he knelt and bowed before her. My divine lord, you have been gone for tens of thousands of years. Your return will finally bless the 6 worlds. As soon as the Emperor Immortal knelt, every other immortal quickly followed. Gu Shijio had been in a dormant state for far too long. Thousands of years had gone by in her absence. She could no longer keep up with the dramatic changes that had taken over the world by storm. She took a look at the immortals behind the Emperor Immortal and shook her head. They were all so young, so she did not recognize any of their faces. Qianshi was among the crowd. Although he was small, his presence could not be easily dismissed. His outstanding aura made him the center of attention. He was always the spotlight in a crowd. He thought that he deserved the same amount of attention from Gu Shijio, but that did not happen. She did not even look his way. She had a short talk with the Emperor Immortal before asking him to leave with his men, as she needed to be alone in peace. The Emperor Immortal cordially invited her to the Celestial Kingdom for the abundance of spiritual power that would help her cultivation. He even offered to build a residence so that she could have a place to stay. Gu Shijio looked away and said nothing. It was a problematic time, so no matter where she chose to go, her presence would certainly stir up the crowd. Hence, she chose to stay away and observe the conflict from afar for the time being. The Emperor Immortal did not force her into accepting his kind offer. I shall not bother you any more about moving away, my divine lord. However, it is still inconvenient for you to stay here alone. Would you like me to appoint 2 young servants for you? Gu Shijio thought that it was a troublesome suggestion and declined it. However, a boy suddenly interrupted. Why do you need a servant boy when I can be the divine lord's disciple? I shall stay by her side and help her with her needs. Qianshi was the most outstanding candidate among the crowd. He looked at Gu Shijio with eyes full of hope and continued, My divine lord, I am a rare talent that is very hard to come by. For a while now, I have been looking for someone to be my master. Fate has brought us here today. I assume that you're going to take me, right? Chapter 2776, The Servant Boy and the Disciple, 2. Gu Shijio kept her stance on the matter. I will not accept any disciple. Qianshi was shocked that she shut the door in his face. He was certainly not used to being rejected. Swiftly, his inner child's instinct kicked in. My divine lord, you said that you were going to take me as your disciple not long ago, he gently reminded. Gu Shijio softly replied, As I said before, I would only offer the opportunity once. If you missed it, you missed it. Qianshi's face flushed crimson with embarrassment. I did not know about you back then. Gu Shijio finally looked at him properly, but with judgment in her eyes. Did you just agree to acknowledge me as your master because you found out my identity? No, no. Qianshi stammered. Gu Shijio continued to look at him sternly with an expression of disapproval. Other than your ability to fawn upon the powerful, you have also disappointed me with your bad lies. Your talents will not do you any good. Qianshi blushed at the unexpected reprimand. He wanted to explain himself, but did not know what to say. His thin lips were pinched into a tight line as he felt wronged. Soon, tears started rolling in his eyes. When he first saw Gu Shijio, he knew that she was the one that he would call his master. However, he was too arrogant to ask for a favor. He rejected Gu Shijio at first only because he was hoping that she would ask again. To his surprise, she did not. Determined, he decided to venture into the Celestial Kingdom in search of a master. He wanted to show Gu Shijio how good he actually was so that she would regret not accepting him as her disciple. As it turned out, he was the one who bore the remorse. All was not lost yet for the boy, as the Emperor Immortal stood up for Qianshi. My divine lord, the child is extraordinary. He has no parents, as he is the product of the pure essence of heaven and earth. He was born with a remarkable level of spiritual power, which makes him a rare talent. If you can train him well, he will be blessed with a great future. The 6 worlds are in a mess right now. Many lives were lost in these troubled times. In order to restore peace, we need a leader to reinforce law and justice. A divine lord's disciple will be the perfect candidate. The boy is young, but he has been through some really hard times for being wanted by every party. Many bad things have taken away his innocence as a child, thus making him a little isolated. However, he's still a good boy. All he needs is a good mentor. Gu Shijio interrupted. Guan Xiao, you have talked too much. I know what I'm doing. You should stop now. After a long pause, the Emperor Immortal finally stopped talking about the boy. He sincerely apologized, was overstepping the line. You are right. I have no place to meddle in this matter. Perhaps we should talk about it later. My divine lord, you have remained dormant for so many years. A lot has changed about the universe, so you'll probably need some help to catch up. I can send 2 servants who are both smart and knowledgeable, so you can ask them questions when necessary. Also, they can help you out with your chores. It will be great if you can mentor them in your free time. What do you think? Quietly, Gu Shijio considered his suggestion. The Emperor Immortal seized the chance and looked through his squad to select 2 smart-looking immortals who would be assigned to Gu Shijio as her young servants. They had to be the best-looking of the lot. Qianshi took the first step and volunteered himself. I agreed to stay and become a servant boy. Shocked, none of the crowd, not even the Emperor Immortal, saw this coming. The arrogant child would not usually submit to anyone so easily. The Emperor Immortal looked at Gu Shijio in bewilderment while waiting for an answer. Gu Shijio slowly added, "Even if you stay, I will not accept you as my disciple. Don't waste your time here." Chapter 2777 The Servant Boy and the Disciple 3. Qianshi still felt embarrassed. "I understand," he firmly said. "I only need a servant boy. I could be your servant boy." Both of the boys chosen by the Emperor Immortal are not even half as smart as I am. Moreover, I have traveled enough to know better than them. Qianshi added while pointing at the boys. Timidly, both of them said nothing. They were too scared to talk back. Eventually, the Emperor Immortal assigned 2 children to be Gu Zijia's servants. There was a boy and a girl. Qianshi was the boy. The girl was a match for Qianshi, whose name was Wu Qinyan. At this point, the tracing spell had begun to burden Di Hao. His forehead was completely drenched in sweat as he buried his head in Gu Shijio's arms while pondering over his problems. He never knew that his mother was somewhat related to Fan Qianshi in such unexpected ways. Also, the girl named Wu Qinyan caught his attention too. He needed to figure out if she had anything to do with Wu Wuyan, the woman by Fan Qianshi's side. At that point in the dream, Fan Qianshi seemed very desperate to become Gu Zijia's disciple. Di Hao could not help but wonder if he had made it. After giving it some thought, Di Hao had a feeling that Fan Qianshi made it in the end. First of all, Fan Qianshi was indeed a rare talent. If he ended up becoming a disciple of some wicked man, he would grow up becoming a threat. As the creator of the universe, Gu Shijio would definitely not hold any persistent feeling of annoyance against the young boy and would also not want him to fall into the wrong hands. Based on the reasoning, Di Hao believed that Fan Qianshi had eventually become her disciple. The rejection must have been a test. She needed to observe if the boy really had the desire to be trained. Di Hao was small in size, but was no longer a child. He had lived through enough experiences to know the purpose behind Gu Zijia's every decision. He recalled all that he knew about the creator of the universe. Her character and appearance somewhat resembled his mother, but the creator had a mighty aura that clearly surpassed his mother's. Di Hao took a look at his mother again and cuddled up to her. He liked how his mother was at this moment. In her previous life, all she cared about was the world's peace. Obviously, there were many responsibilities that she had to bear. She was more of a divine being who genuinely cared about her people and was not a person with feelings and emotions. Therefore, Di Hao was desperate to find out what happened to the creator of the universe. He took a short rest for about 2 hours before continuing his search into Gu Zijia's past. The return of the creator of the universe was a big deal to all 6 worlds. The creator of the universe was the one who made life possible in the very beginning. All human beings, animals, and even monsters were her creation. She was undoubtedly the sole ancestor and god that they all shared. Before she became dormant, all beings lived together in harmony. But things took a bad turn in her absence. Without her, there were no rules and no restrictions. The complications then began, which led to a violent struggle for thousands of years. The grudge and death over the numerous wars gave birth to ghosts and demons all around. The world had undoubtedly become a bad place. Therefore, the news of her return was widespread in every corner of the 6 realms. The kings and leaders of the Celestial Kingdom, Animal Kingdom, Monster Kingdom, and the Devil Kingdom were eager to see her, each with different purposes, for they were all worried that she might show a discernible bias towards their enemy. Reasons were made up just so that they could meet her. However, all of them were denied entry since none of them could make it through the wizardry barrier. Although her kung fu was badly depleted, the wizardry barrier remained unaffected. It was built with the very foundation of her divine power, so no one was able to break it unless they knew the same kung fu as her. The Emperor Immortal was the only one who knew her, as he was once placed under her service, so he had the chance of learning some bits of her kung fu. Chapter 2778. Acknowledging a master, the creator of the universe had awakened, but it seemed as though nothing had changed. She kept herself within the wizardry barrier that she created and refused to see anyone. No one knew what she was planning to do, so none of the kings or leaders dared to act recklessly. Instead, they tried to collect as much information as they could about her, so they knew what they were dealing with. However, there was nothing much they could study about her. Everything about her was long forgotten over time. The Emperor Immortal was the only one who knew a little bit about the divine being, but he never shared anything with anyone. All of his followers were strictly told to stay away. Eventually, the kings or leaders from other kingdoms took the Emperor Immortal as an example and became worried. The only being that was able to intimidate the Emperor Immortal to stay quiet must be truly exceptional. They assumed that the divine being must be so exceptionally powerful that she could simply change the world with a snap of her fingers. Meanwhile, Gu Shijio had interrupted a few battles when she first woke up from her long sleep. So, the survivors of the battles gave enormous publicity on how great and powerful she was when she saved them. The survivors trumpeted their victory to warn anyone against any potential invasions. As for the losers, they needed to publicize her power and use her interference as an excuse to cover up the fact that they were incompetent to win the battle. Within months, her name was well spread to every corner of the world with slightly different versions of the same story. All this happened even though she had barely done anything. The only thing they knew about her was the fact that the creator of the universe disliked having disputes. Hence, they did not want to make any moves before finding out more about her. The hostilities ceased, and normal life was finally resumed. Within the wizardry barrier, Gu Shijio finally stopped meditating and walked away from the tranquil little cottage. All the shrubs had blossomed beautifully. Her servants, Qianshi and Wu Qinyan, were busy collecting the herbs. Qianshi was a very smart boy. Even though Gu Shijio only taught him a little about medicine and the characteristics of different herbal plants, he immediately mastered the skills of cultivating the plants and managed to grow the herbs in perfect condition. Wu Qinyan, on the other hand, lacked such talent. Her section of the herbs in the garden did not grow well under her care. As soon as they saw Gu Shijio, both children approached and greeted her with a bow. "My divine lord." Gu Shijio nodded at them, and her eyes then lingered on the herb garden suggestively. She took a look at Qianshi and saw the solid confidence on his face. He was looking at her, patiently waiting for her compliment. However, Gu Shijio did not say anything to him. She then turned to look at Wu Qinyan and said, "As I said, any failure in the herb plantation would result in punishment." Wu Qinyan knelt before her. "I am ready to be punished. You are required to water every herbal plant in this valley for a month. If the herb garden remains dull, you will have to suffer the pain of being poked with 1,000 needles." Wu Qianyan's face went pale. "Yes," she firmly acknowledged. At least 1,000 pails of water were needed to water the plants in the entire valley. Given that the stream was quite far away from the herb plantation, Wu Qinyan would have to work all day and night to fulfill her mission. It was not easy, and if she failed, the punishment of being poked by needles was nothing less than the pain of having her flesh slashed apart, piece by piece. Qinyan and Qianshi both witnessed the cruelty of such punishment before. Death was a better and easier way out than the savage torment. Those who suffered screeched with pain throughout the entire sentence. "I will be away for a month. I expect to see a good result a month from now." Gu Shijio left a message before vanishing in a thin air. Qianshi could not hide his disappointment. He pouted his lips in discontentment, but did not speak. Meanwhile, Wu Qinyan walked towards him with a desperate call for help. "Qianshi, could you please help me? I try to keep these plants alive, but I don't know how." Chapter 2779. Acknowledging a Master, 2. Qianshi was not interested in helping her. "You're so stupid," he criticized before leaving her behind. Wu Qinyan knew that he had to rely on herself. She was not allowed to use any spells within the valley, so watering the plants had become a physical chore. Wu Qinyan was petite, so her physical strength was obviously not as strong as her spiritual power. Planting the herbs was tough enough, but carrying the water all the way to the herb garden was even tougher. She supported the pails on her shoulder and staggered off, puffing and blowing from the strain. Unfortunately, despite her best efforts, only 2/3 of the garden was watered after laboring all day. Her shoulders started aching, and even her feet had turned soft. Nonetheless, her work incomplete. Panicked, she started crying and imagining the consequences of her failure. While she was carrying the water up the valley, her tears were already rolling down her cheeks. However, she stepped into the herb garden and saw something unbelievable. Somewhere in the plantation, Qianshi could be seen squatting in the bushes and taking care of the plants for her. Apparently, he finally agreed to help. Wu Qianyan's eyes glistened with hope. As she walked toward him, carelessly, she slipped and almost rolled over the herbs. Fortunately, Qianshi's agility had saved her from the misery of crushing the plants. He quickly held onto her arm and steadied her from slipping any further. "Thank you. Thank you." How stupid. Qianshi let go of her arm and wiped away the dirt on his hands, as if protesting that Wu Qinyan was filthy. He continued to help her with the 2 pails of water and watered the part of the garden where she had yet to reach. Wu Qinyan quietly followed him around. "How much more have you yet to water?" "About 10 acres. With your speed, you'll have to work all night." Wu Qinyan sounded a little helpless as she explained, I have already tried my best." Qianshi did not comment any further. Quietly, he went to take another 2 pails and helped to fetch water from the stream. Wu Qinyan was happy that he could help, though he had not been entirely nice to her. Without wasting any time, she joined him to fetch more water. In one corner of the herb garden, Gu Shijio finally revealed herself. She seemed troubled by her own thoughts. With a sigh, she let out a quiet murmur. "The child is not too bad. At least there is hope. If I focus on his good side and train him well, he will be a man of great ability and tremendous potential. Perhaps he could take over my position." The bright moon was already hanging high up in the night sky as the 2 children continued carrying pails of water to the garden. Gu Shijio had cast an invisible spell, so none of them spotted her presence. She watched as the children came and went for about 4 hours before the entire herb garden was sufficiently watered. Once it was done, Wu Qinyan expressed her gratitude for Qianshi's help, but he did not take it well. "I'm not trying to help you. I'm only worried that the Divine Lord's herb garden is lacking proper care." Before he went away, he offered Wu Qinyan a tube of medicine. "Apply this on the skin at your shoulders. It will soothe the blisters. Otherwise, you will not be able to carry the water on your shoulders tomorrow and will fail your mission." The 2 children finally went to bed. Gu Shijio sat down by the ridge of the field while she quietly observed the sky. She then took a look at her own hand. Her fingers were slender and exquisite, but were so pale that her hands were almost invisible. "My spiritual power is getting worse by day. I wonder if I can ever find someone to replace me before my immortalization. When will the next guardian come by? Is Qianshi the one?" She seldom talked to the boy, but she never ceased to observe him from a distance. The result of her observation was quite satisfactory. At the very least, the books that she had offered to him were not wasted. Although she never made it clear that he was her disciple, she still offered him some books and materials that could help him in the development of his character through different methods of cultivation. For the past month, Gu Shijio assigned complicated tasks for the children to fulfill. Usually, Qianshi could always accomplish the task, given fairly quickly and well. As for Wu Qinyan, She could hardly reach the minimum expectation, and her tasks were mostly left unfinished. Qianshi would still help her, though he always complained about it. Chapter 2780, Acknowledging a Master. 3. To make a better decision as to who to appoint as her successor, Gu Shizhou had done some research on Qianshi's background. He was indeed created by heaven and earth without any biological parents. He was discovered on a stormy night. Someone found him in the wilderness and became aware of his unique physique, thus initiating the fight between different parties for him. The couple that she met the other day was from the Celestial Kingdom. They were assigned to hold the genius boy captive. As expected, the child was never taught how to behave properly. He had only been involved in endless fights that opened his eyes to the bad side of humans, which was why his personality was a little odd. With this in mind, Gu Shizhou continued to contemplate the future. She looked at the sky and was completely at ease. She was not bothered about the fact that immortalization was beginning to dawn on her. In reality, Dihao was baffled by what she said. He realized that the creator of the universe had indeed vanished, and the role was taken over by Fan Qianshi. Surprisingly, Gu Shizhou had foreseen her own death. Her immortalization could possibly be from a natural cause. Was Fan Qianshi really the perfect candidate for her? If so, how did Di Fuyi's role as the master of the heavenly law come along? Dihao was very curious about what happened next, so he continued to look in her past. Gu Shizhou had been putting Fan Qianshi through a series of tests for 2 years straight, troubling him with all kinds of problems and complications. It was easy for Dihao to understand and sympathize with Fan Qianshi's predicament. Things were made intentionally difficult for little Qianshi. He burst into tears a few times, but he would always stand up strong again and face his challenges with courage. Whatever the task was, he would do his best to execute it to perfection. Although Gu Shizhou had not formally acknowledged him as her disciple, she still taught him the things that she knew, which mostly revolved around spells. He was able to learn all kinds of things, from alchemy to medicine, and ways to grow herbs. Little Qianshi was indeed a young genius. He could learn everything almost instantly, especially in the medical field. This boy was born with a talent in medicine. The pills that he produced from the alchemy were incredibly effective, even better than the ones produced by the professionals in the Celestial Kingdom. Visitors to the valley came in an endless stream to request for the pills that he made. Perhaps it was under Gu Zhijia's influence that he made a positive change in his behavior. He was no longer as arrogant as he used to be and was humble when meeting people. Also, he no longer talked harshly to Wu Qinyan. For many times, Gu Shizhou would take him along to see the outside world while having their appearance disguised. Whenever something happened, he would always stand up for the just. The good side of his personality started to shine through and became much better than his former arrogant self. In the 3rd year, there was an incident that changed her mind about accepting him as her disciple. While they were traveling, a group of unknown and yet powerful strangers suddenly attacked them. About 110 enemies showed up altogether, each equipped with great power and strength. All of their looks were disguised as they emerged for the ambush. Gu Zhijia's level of spiritual power remained only a fifth of her former, stronger self, so defending herself became quite a difficult task. Although she managed to kill most of them, she, in turn, was severely injured. It was Qianshi who risked his life to save hers. He took her on his back while trying to fight a way out of the ruthless killings. He took the chance and used the ground drilling technique in an attempt to escape to a safe place. They made their way into a dense mountain and found a cave where they could rest. Gu Shizhou did not rest for long. She got up and saw Qianshi by her side. He was already covered in a mess of blood and mud. He disregarded his own injuries and decided to guard her safety while she slept. Quietly, Gu Shizhou pulled him closer so that she could treat his wounds. When they safely returned to the valley, she asked, "Do you want to take me as your master?" Shocked, Qianshi was overwhelmed with joy by the question. He knelt down and finally called out loud the name that he had been dying to use, "Master." Chapter 2781, A coincidence, Gu Shijio studied him for a while and heaved a sigh after making some calculations about his destiny. Your name is incomplete. I shall now grant you a surname. What about Fan? Qianqi's eyes glistened with joy. Thank you, my master. From now on, I will be known as Fan Qianshi. Do you know what the word fan stands for? Please enlighten me, Qianshi answered. Your personality is unpredictable. There is no clear line between right or wrong for you. At times, your way of dealing with a situation may get a little too aggressive. Hence, the word fan means to show great mercy. I hope that you can be compassionate and stay away from any wrongdoings. May you be a great man for thousands of years to come and protect the world with all you can. Fan Qianshi took some time to absorb her words and then replied, I shall do as you said, master. Due to his unique physique that was nurtured by the essence of heaven and earth, the rate of his growth was tremendous. In 3 years, his physical appearance had changed from that of a toddler into a teenager with adult qualities and strength. In reality, Dihao could not help but sigh. As expected, Fan Qianshi really did become Gu Zijia's disciple. He knew his mother well enough to be aware that she would either keep her guard high up or trust a person wholeheartedly. There was no in-between. She even gave Fan Qianshi his name. It seemed like Gu Shijio was ready to let him take over her role when she was finally gone. At this point, no signs of the Master of Heavenly Law were revealed yet. He wondered if the Master of Heavenly Law had already come into existence by that time. That sounded very plausible, since creating the heavenly laws could be a very long process. It was meant to create harmony among the 6 worlds over time. When Gu Shijio was still alive, the 6 worlds were not well established yet. Anyone could do anything without being bound by any laws. Fighting was a common occurrence when things did not work out the way a party intended. It was a world without structure, governance, and laws. Without a proper set of rules, the Master of Heavenly Law would have no role to play. Nonetheless, perhaps it just was not the right time for Di Fui to show up yet. Dihao was a little disappointed. He stared at Gu Shijio in his vision and could not help but wonder how Fan Qianshi became so wicked. He decided to keep watching to find out more, because, as far as he was concerned, Fan Qianshi was not a bad person when Gu Shijio took him under her apprenticeship. Fortunately for Dihao, the tracing spell that used had the features to speed up the images in his vision or even rewind to help him see the details better. His vision was brought forward across the timeline. A decade had passed, so Fan Qianshi and Wu Qinyan had been with Gu Shijio for 10 years now. Over the past decade, Gu Shijio had been very mysterious and kept a very low profile. She never met any of the kings or leaders. When she had to travel somewhere, she would always use the facial disguise technique to cover up her identity. The wizardry barrier that secured the valley, on the contrary, had become stronger and brighter in time, so no one dared to cross the line. Nonetheless, in actuality, Gu Zijia's kung fu did not improve at all over the last decade. Instead, she had taken many steps backward. Her level of spiritual power was only about 10% left of her former strength. The main positive was that she could upkeep her divine aura, so people dared not take advantage of her. When any leaders came to visit, they would be turned down by the creator of the universe and met by Fan Qianshi. As soon as Gu Shijio took him as her disciple, she taught him everything that she knew, thus taking his progress to a higher level. In a decade, Fan Qianqi's kung fu had already surpassed any other immortals with thousands of years of cultivation. When he was born, he was only at the level of a golden immortal. By now, he was almost a great deity. The rulers of the 6 worlds all witnessed the tremendous progress of the child, which they knew was only possible under the guidance of the creator of the universe. Chapter 2782. A coincidence, too. The child was known to be a genius, but his talents would not have been discovered without a great mentor. Therefore, the people of all 6 worlds became more intimidated by Gu Zijia's power and decided to stop doing anything that upset her, which included fighting. The decade was an unusually peaceful era. After years of war and chaos, all kingdoms could finally recuperate and rebuild themselves. According to Fan Qianxi's biological age, he was only 16 years old, but his adult appearance resembled nothing of his teenage years. He became a handsome man that was unsurpassed in valor and brilliance. When Wu Qinyan first met Gu Shijio, she was only 8 years old. Time had completely transformed her into a young woman of grace and elegance too. Unlike Fan Qianshi, Wu Qinyan was not born to be a genius. Still, her exposure to the creator of the universe had opened up opportunities for her to improve her power. In time, she benefited greatly from Gu Zijia's help and finally achieved the level of a golden immortal. At the very least, she was able to keep herself safe in times of danger. Moreover, the people from all 6 worlds acknowledged her identity as the servant of the creator of the universe. Hence, none of them dared to make any moves against her or challenge her authority, even though she would generally be assigned to take care of trivial errands. Warm spring winds wafted across the room, carrying the warmth of the sun along with it. On a bamboo chair, Gu Shijio sat in repose. A sudden movement caught her attention, so she quickly opened her eyes. She caught Fan Qianshi quietly sneaking in. He was about to place a hot bowl of congee on the table for her. The pleasant scent of the blue congee lingered in the air, blasting her senses with an eagerness to taste the food. Their eyes met, and Fan Qianshi blushed a little. He looked away and said, "Master, this is a bowl of blue congee that I made with meat broth. Try it." Gu Shijio remained still and looked rather unimpressed. "You're doing this again. Haven't I told you to focus on your practice instead? You shouldn't be doing the chores," she said in a rather icy tone. Fan Qianshi seemed slightly disappointed, but chose to explain himself. "Master, you must have overexerted yourself. Your complexion is slightly pale. This bowl of blue congee is meant to invigorate your body with its rich nutrients. Making this did not take much of my time, anyway. Master, you should finish it up. I shall continue my practice now." Gu Shijio pinched her lips into a thin line in disapproval. "Don't repeat this next time," she added. Slowly, she picked up the bowl and slowly drank it down. Delighted, Fan Qianshi then proceeded to practice his kung fu. Gu Shijio sat in a brown study chair, while wondering if she was overthinking the situation because Fan Qianshi seemed to treat her like she was more than his master. She was obviously aware that her condition had worsened over time, but no amount of food could restore her health. Nothing could stop the deterioration that had already taken place many years ago. Even a divine being had 5 dying symptoms. Although she still bore the look of a young woman, the first dying symptom was already emerging. With her decrease in power, her lifespan was now less than a century. She gently knocked her knuckles on the table while getting all caught up in her thoughts. The next day, Fan Qianshi approached her with another bowl of hot food. Only this time, it was a bowl of brown rice congee, enriched with many nutritional herbs. The collection of the herbs alone would take him at least half a day. In addition to the special technique of making the congee, he must have spent at least a day preparing it. Excitedly, Fan Qianshi put the bowl down in front of her. Gu Shijio was in the middle of her writing when he interrupted her. She took a look at the congee, then at Fan Qianshi. "Haven't I told you to stop doing this?" Hesitantly, Fan Qianshi explained, "Master, the red rice is sourced from the monster kingdom. It is known to be one of their treasured resources. Its nutrients can give you strength. You will feel better after drinking it." Chapter 2783. A Coincidence 3. Before he could finish his sentence, the bowl of congee was already splashed right across the floor. Gu Shijio had pushed the bowl off the table. "Go away," she sternly said as soon as the bowl shattered on the floor. Fan Qianshi was utterly surprised by Gu Zijia's sudden reaction. His fingers immediately started to tremble uncontrollably under his sleeves. Before he could explain himself further, Gu Shijio was already shouting at him. "I know myself better than you do, so there is no need for you to worry about me. Stay away for a month and don't show up again." Fan Qianshi clenched his fists. "Yes," he finally agreed after a long pause. He exited her room slowly. The room fell into complete silence after his departure. The kanji was still warm on the floor, infusing the air with its delicious scent. Gu Shijio sighed while looking at the wasted food. The scent of the delicious kanji was still tempting her. She liked the taste of kanji. Although she no longer needed sustenance from food, she could not keep herself away from all the delicious food in the world. Very often, she would disguise herself and join the locals in tasting good food. Dihao watched as Gu Shijio hesitantly looked at the wasted kanji on the floor for a while before clearing the mess up. He shook his head in disapproval, for he knew that Fan Qianshi was indeed hoping for something more from his relationship with Gu Shijio. Nonetheless, Gu Shijio obviously did not feel the same way about him. Fan Qianshi was only a disciple in her eyes. Did Fan Qianshi become evil in the end by turning his love into hatred? To find out, Dihao had to continue. The scent of the kanji managed to trigger Gu Zijia's appetite. She decided to disguise herself so that she could blend into the crowd at a famous restaurant in the Monster Kingdom. All she asked for was a bowl of red rice kanji. The place was rather crowded and filled with uproarious talk and laughter. However, Gu Shijio did not request for an independent room. She enjoyed the hustle and bustle of life at times. The liveliness there certainly excited her. The red rice kanji from the restaurant tasted excellent, though it was a little expensive. A bowl of kanji cost her 1,000 spiritual stones. Fortunately, Gu Shijio had many spiritual stones with her, so the price did not bother her at all. Her hunger for food took over her, so she decided to add more dishes to her meal. Just when she was happily eating, a sudden wave of silence took over the entire place. Gasps of astonishment could be heard across the air. "Oh my, he is so handsome! Too beautiful!" Handsome is not enough to describe his ethereal beauty. He is surreal. The man's appearance had provoked much discussion. Gu Shijio was curious, so she looked up and saw a handsome and young man by the door. He stood as straight as an arrow, and his silky smooth, pitch-black hair gently hung across his shoulder. His exquisite features were as pretty as any artist could paint a man to be. There was a red jade piece embellished on his forehead band, faintly glistening with light. Meanwhile, the corners of his mouth twitched up into a nonchalant smile while he stared at the crowd with undivided attention. His eyes swept across the hall, and everyone's heart thumped with excitement whenever his eyes met with theirs. All the men sat up straight in a proper manner. As for the women, they were busy fixing their hair and makeup so that they could present their best selves. In reality, Dihao was in shock. His fingers were trembling so much that the spell almost failed to channel the vision over to him. He wondered who the man was and felt that he reminded him of his father, Difui. However, their looks were not exactly the same. In fact, the man in the vision was not as good looking as Difui. Dihao's heart raced in excitement. He had to continue. Back in his vision, every table in the restaurant was already occupied. Some were full of people, while others still had seats available. Like Gu Shijio, some were also in the restaurant all alone. "Is there any room available?" the young man finally asked. His voice was charming and sweet. The waiter and the owner of the restaurant both shook their heads in unison. It was the busiest time of the day in the restaurant, so the rooms were all full. Chapter 2784. A coincidence, for, although the restaurant was full, the staff seemed eager for the young man to stay. "Gentlemen, would you be open to sharing your table with other guests?" They kindly offered. They then asked the guests in the restaurant, "Is there anyone who would like to share a table with this gentleman? I can give you a discount for sharing the table." "Me? Here. Come here. I can share the table with him." All of a sudden, about 7 or 8 people stood up, offering to share their table in an eager manner. Apparently, the young man's beauty had conquered the hearts of many. Both men and women were interested. Gu Shijio continued to enjoy her drink without volunteering herself. In fact, everything that happened in the restaurant made her laugh. These days, people were so easily obsessed with one's appearance. Nonetheless, she wondered which table would the young man finally go to. Of many that stood up, there was a very pretty lady that was seated next to Gu Zijia's table. Coincidentally, The lady was also wearing a red dress that evening, so her outfit matched with the young man's red robes perfectly. Like Gushijio, the lady was sitting alone too. Some men tried to ask if they could sit with her before, but she turned them all down with an uninviting and stern look. Nevertheless, this time, she was the one who made the invitation to the young man. The young man slowly walked towards the lattice direction. Color bloomed in her cheeks as he approached her table. She was excited that the young man was about to accept her invitation. "Gentlemen, please." The young man did not wait for her to finish before walking past her table as if she never existed. He stopped in front of Gu Zijia's table and asked, "Lady, may I join your table?" Gu Shijio was surprised. Her original appearance was disguised under a spell, so she carried the look of an average maiden. She was not hideous, but not exactly attractive. Her looks were considered common, and her presence could be easily dismissed in a crowd. Gu Shijio thought that the ordinary looks she carried would be a safe disguise for her. Never had she thought that the young man would come up to her all of a sudden to share a table. She touched her face intuitively to make sure that she still had the appearance of an ordinary maiden and was relieved that her true appearance was not exposed. Perplexed, she then looked at the young man. He was still standing right across her table and looking at her smilingly. She could not tell what he was thinking from his expression, but found it rather odd. His face however, was very attractive, regardless of his expression. Nonetheless, Gu Shijio was not interested in a relationship. She only thought that the young man was a little odd. "I did not invite you. Look around. Many did," she gently reminded him. The young man finally smiled and asked, "Why didn't you?" Gu Shijio did not answer. "Aren't you attracted by my appearance?" "Frankly, I am not," she answered. She had seen many beautiful men all her life, but was never interested in any. The creator of the universe had to be austere without any selfish desire. The young man took out his fan and waved it in his hand. "That is right. I cannot eat well under their intense gaze of admiration, so I will not join their tables. You are not friendly, but you are the kind of table mate that I need. I shall sit here, then." He gave a chair a quick sweep, so as to flick away any dust from his seat. He then sat down right away. Gu Shijio did not make any comments since the man was only there to share the table, so she did not really mind. The young man proceeded to order a few dishes, and the food did not take long to be served on his side of the table. He took a look at the plates and bowls that were not neatly placed and waved his hand to cast a spell to rearrange the dishes into 2 lines. Chapter 2785, Obsessive and Compulsive Behavior. He then took a look at the pile of plates on Gu Zijia's side of the table. Gu Shijio was very casual and unconcerned about the table manners here in the restaurant. She did not mind how the waiter placed the dishes on her table. All she did was eat. A synonym for casual and unconcerned would be messy. Gu Shijio wanted to take a few bites on the steamed fish, but before her chopsticks reached the meat, the whole dish was already moving away from her. Instead, a dish of spicy fried pork slices replaced it, and her chopsticks went right in. She was stunned as she looked up and saw the dishes on her side of the table magically arranged neatly into 2 lines. "What are you trying to do?" She looked at the young man and was unimpressed. "I cannot stand the mess. Please do not mind me. It is an old habit of mine." The young man continued to enjoy his meal. Gu Shijio said nothing more. There were all kinds of people in the world, many with weird behaviors and bad tempers. As the creator of the universe, she should not mind it, and take this as a chance to show her generosity. Therefore, she continued to enjoy her food without any remarks. Gu Shijio liked all kinds of food with shells, like prawns and crabs. However, instead of using utensils, she preferred to eat shellfish with her hands. She thought that it was a very mundane way of savoring food, which was something she enjoyed. She cared about cleanliness as well, so all the shells were placed on a plate instead of on the table. She thought that it was already neat enough, but to her surprise, the young man remained unimpressed. He took a look at the plate full of shells and decided to do something about it. With a wave, he cast another spell and placed all the shells on the plate neatly according to their sizes. The mess of shells was beautifully arranged into intricate patterns of a flower. Gu Shijio had to put a large shell down on the table, but was caught in a dilemma. The shell would simply ruin the patterns that were already arranged on the plate. Troubled, she was beginning to feel annoyed with the man who was sharing her table. It had reached a point where she could not even fully enjoy her food. After all, she was here to eat, not to make decorations. It was tiring to share a table with someone with such an obsessive and compulsive behavior. Gu Shijio tried to suppress her irritation, but could not. She decided to throw the shell onto the plate and turn the shells on the plate into a mess. The young man threw a sharp look at her, and she did not hesitate to do the same back to him. Their eyes lingered on one another's face for a while before the young man finally spoke. "In order to return your favor for sharing the table with me, I shall remove the shells for you. Is that all right?" The young man gently offered with a tender smile. Gu Shijio thought about his offer for a second and agreed. "Great, please do." The young man cast another spell from his fingertips, making every shellfish on every dish move. All the shells of the prawns and crabs were removed and placed neatly on another plate. As usual, these shells were arranged in a proper pattern. The meat that remained on her plate was nicely shelled with very little fuss. Gu Shijio was suddenly drawn to his obsessive and compulsive manner. He could perfectly fit into the Department of Justice. The six worlds lacked a set of laws to govern the course of life. They also lacked a leader. The man could be a great leader in framing a constitution. Certainly, it was just a sudden inspiration. She was not very keen on making it happen. However, the law could not be simply made and governed by anyone. The role must be played by a divine being that was brought about naturally by the essence of heaven and earth. Only then would it take its effect. Gu Shijio studied the man and realized that he was only a mighty immortal. As far as she was concerned, Fan Qianshi was the only man who was formed and nurtured by the essence of heaven and earth. Chapter 2786. Being jealous, she was suddenly reminded of Fan Qianshi and sighed. He was a great disciple, but had, unfortunately, become enamored of her. It was indeed troublesome. First of all, she did not have much time left. Secondly, as the creator of the universe, she should share her unconditional love with every being in the world and not limit herself to a relationship. He needed to understand the importance of being unbiased, or else the six worlds would fall back into a mess once he took the role from her. Hence, she needed him to move on. While she was caught in her preoccupation, someone suddenly made fun of her with total contempt. Did you suddenly become dumb? An ugly being will always be ugly. A simple, kind gesture from a handsome man can easily make you dumbstruck. Gu Shijio followed the voice and noticed that the remark was coming from the beautiful lady beside her. Scornfully, the lady was looking at her with resentment. Was a lady jealous? Gu Shijio felt sorry for her. Her attractiveness was only in her appearance. The lady gave the young man a quick look and caught him looking back at her with a half-smile. He had not commented anything about the incident. After a pause, Gu Shijio asked smilingly, "I have had enough of the shellfish. Gentlemen, would you please help me remove the bones from my fish?" The young man was fascinated by Gu Zijia's sudden request. Ugly beings will do all sorts of things to catch other people's attention. The reason he offered his help to you at first was because of your messy table manners. Now you're taking his help for granted. Why don't you have a better look at yourself? Do you really think you are attractive enough to make so many unreasonable requests? The lady spoke arrogantly. Gu Shijio could not care less about the rude lady. Quietly, she smiled at her and decided to handle the fish on her own. She took the dish over and started removing the fish bones with her fingers. Soon, all of her fingers were stained with sauce. The young man was speechless. With a sigh, he took the dish away from Gu Shijio and started removing the bones for her. He then handed her a silk handkerchief. "Use this to clean your fingers." Gu Shijio did not refuse his offer. She took the handkerchief over and simply rubbed her hands in it. She was ready to put the handkerchief down on the table, but was suddenly stopped by the young man. He was already sitting next to her by then. He grasped her by the wrist and took the handkerchief. Patiently, he started cleaning every stain that was left on her hands. Gu Shijio was astonished. She tilted her head to have a look at the other lattice expression. The lady gasped in disbelief, as her presence was completely ignored. Gu Shijio did not mind that he was touching her hand, as long as the lady was annoyed. What intrigued her most was the sudden change of the young man's attitude toward her needs. He was exceptionally patient with her. If he had to take other people's table manners and hygiene, so personally every time he sat with someone else, he would be so busy clearing someone else's mess every time he ate. Gu Shijio actually felt sorry for him. Young man, being too compulsive is a burden in life. It will not do you any good, she told him while gently tapping his shoulder. The young man remained quiet, and Gu Shijio no longer cared about him. It was time for her to go. May I have the bill, please? The owner approached her hurriedly. That will be 3,006 spiritual stones. Gu Shijio reached her back pocket to take out her purse, only to realize that it was no longer there. The owner's friendly face slowly faded. If Gu Shijio refused to pay for the food, he would need to work for at least a month to make up for the loss. Lady, what happened? Gu Shijio awkwardly replied. My purse is gone. The owner was offended. Are you making up reasons to eat for free? Gu Shijio never thought that someday she would experience such embarrassment by having her purse stolen. She did not even know when it was taken away. Chapter 2787. She and I are like old friends. No one got close to her during the time that she was in the restaurant, so her own carelessness was the only logical explanation for her missing purse. Although Di Hao was in the comfort of Gu Zijia's bed, he felt anxious for her as well. He guessed that the concept of a storage space had yet to be invented during that primitive time. Meanwhile, the owner was infuriated. So, it seems you are here to get free food. Do you think I am a fool? The man reached out his hand to pull her collar. However, she would not let him do so and took a few quick steps back to avoid his hand. All of a sudden, a pouch filled with money was offered to cease the feud. Mister, I will pay for her bill. The owner was surprised by the young man's kind offer. He took a look at the pouch and felt bad for the amount of money that the young man was about to spend for the commoner. Gentlemen, her bill is quite a large sum of money. It is equivalent to the total income of a normal family in a year. You have only just met her. She and I are like old friends. I am willing to spend this amount of money on her. All the other guests in the restaurant were equally caught off guard by the man's generous offer. They did not think that the hideous girl was worthy of the handsome man's generosity. The beautiful lady from the next table was already clenching her fists in utter frustration. She wished she could give Gu Shijio a tight slap in the face. Since someone was ready to offer up money to compensate the owner, he would definitely take it. He was all but ready to accept the payment, but was suddenly interrupted. Hold on, Gu Shijio interrupted. The owner looked at her in disbelief. What more do you want to say? Gu Shijio knew very well that no one would do anything so unconditionally for a stranger. His generosity must come with a price. She had a feeling that the man was quite a problem, so she did not want to get too involved with him. At this point, she could no longer play dumb. She opened up her storage bag and took out another pouch of money. Swiftly, she threw the bag down on the table and said, Take this. There is more than what I have to pay. The bag contained at least 1,000 pieces of upper-class spiritual stone. Indeed, the total value was more than enough to pay for the bill. Many of the people in the restaurant had never seen a storage bag before. Therefore, many curious eyes were locked on her. Even the young man was surprised. He could not stop looking at her storage bag in astonishment. Gu Shijio did not want to stay any longer, so she sealed away her storage bag and left the restaurant. In the wilderness, a whirling fog lingered in the air. The thick cloud of water droplets appeared so suddenly like it was formed out of thin air in an instant. Gu Shijio watched as a lady in a dark green dress slowly emerged from the fog. What are you trying to do? She questioned the intruder. The lady in green was the same beauty that was sitting next to Gu Shijio not long ago. The only difference was her outfit. She was wearing a dress of crimson color back then that looked very refined and elegant. With this dark green dress, she looked extremely wicked, as opposed to her elegant self back then. I have underestimated you, lady. How did you manage to seduce such a handsome man with that hideous face of yours?" Abruptly, a snake-shaped sword appeared in her palm. The edge of the sword was as sharp as the fang of a venomous snake. "I shall now skin you alive, so I can see what is beneath your ugly appearance." On the tip of the sword, a dark green snake emerged. In a snap, the snake made a lunge towards Gu Shijio in a deadly manner. At the level of a golden immortal, every strike of hers could be considered as deadly. The snake was as swift as lightning, so it would be tricky for anyone to avoid its deadly attacks. However, Gu Shijio was not just anyone from the mundane world. Even with only 10% of her spiritual power left, she was still much stronger than the lady in green. She reached out to the snake and grasped it at its weakest point. With just the twist of her wrist, the snake immediately faded away into bits of light. Chapter 2788. Look what you made me do. The lady in green had not expected it. In just one move, she immediately realized that she had underestimated Gu Zijia's strength. Nonetheless, she was not ready to give up the fight just yet. She pointed her sword at Gu Shijio and sent 3 more green snakes charging at her. The snakes were very venomous. Once bitten, one could consider themselves dead. However, Gu Shijio simply waved her sleeves across the air and dismissed the snakes with a slight twitch of her fingertips. She did not even have to move a lot to cast the spell, yet all 3 snakes were already clenched by their necks. In an instant, the snakes were turned into glimpses of light and faded into nothingness. "Ugly woman, look what you made me do." This time, she raised the bar. In a mist of grayish-green fog suddenly appeared, and the water droplets within the clouds slowly condensed into a giant green python. Almost instantaneously, it became alive and made a lunge for Gu Shijio. Gu Shijio found the trick a little familiar, as it was the devil venomous python. It was the most nefarious and demonical python that existed, equipped with deadly and yet lustful venom. The python would mate with its victim before swallowing the victim's soul as a whole. Gu Shijio was a divine being with a generous spirit, but the latter's selfish act of jealousy was too much for her to forgive. They were not even enemies, and yet the lady desperately wanted her dead by crushing her soul. The lady was evil and unscrupulous, which was a rarity in Gu Zijia's life. With all that had happened, Gu Shijio decided to serve her some punishment. She twisted her wrist in a circular motion to summon a golden whip, which she used to attack the incoming python. The long whip was a magical item, so when Gu Shijio had launched it toward the snake, 1,000 shining golden beams with boundless radiance were directed at it. The devil venomous python was obviously scared of the golden light. It tried to shrink its body as quickly as it could to avoid the ruthless attack. However, Gu Shijio was not done with it. She took an intimidating step forward and flung her whip at the python again. It slowly took the form of a mighty dragon that came alive in a second. With its outstretched body, the dragon started attacking the python. The devil venomous python was terrified, huddling itself in fear. While the golden whip was still swinging in the air, Gu Shijio suddenly collapsed with a temporary loss of consciousness. A sudden jolt had plunged her forward, thus stopping the constant stream of spiritual power to her hand. In an instant, the entire dragon disappeared from the air. Gu Shijio could not help but curse. Her 5 dying symptoms had begun to take place. Sometimes her spiritual power would fade away very suddenly. She just did not expect it to happen at this critical moment. The devil venomous python was ready to surrender, but the disappearance of the golden light had boosted its confidence. It had just escaped death and perhaps even had an opportunity to attack. Excitedly, it launched its second attack at Gu Shijio. Gu Shijio wanted to defend herself, but was too weak even to stand up straight. She barely had any strength left to avoid the incoming strike. In dismay, she clenched her fists and was ready to admit defeat. The python was already closing in when an intricate melody started playing in the air. The tune was coming from a flute amid the fog. The tune was a weakness of the python. As soon as the melody was played, the python found itself paralyzed. Like a curse, the python started dancing along with the melody and had completely forgotten its mission. The lady in green was infuriated by the interception. She shouted out loud at the stranger in the fog. "Who is there? How dare you ruin my plan?" A stranger slowly walked out from the thick fog to answer her calling. The stranger was holding a fiery red umbrella and wore green robes that were slightly obscured in the fog, like a painting of distant mountains shrouded in mist and rain. With a slight smile, the stranger stared at the lady with contempt. The stranger was a young man from the restaurant. At this moment, he was holding an umbrella in one hand and a flute in another. The thick fog was cold and blustery, forming a strong contrast to his strong and vibrant appearance. Although his robes and the umbrella did not match, he was the kind of man who could carry any style with ease, even with obviously contrasting elements. Chapter 2789. Would you like to see? The lady gasped in disbelief as soon as she saw the man. She then quickly used another spell to summon her python back. However, the python was still dancing frantically, unable to control its body. For the first time, it did not obey her command. Gu Shijio felt hopeful, so she stepped aside and took a rest under a nearby tree. At the side, she could tell that the melody began to speed up with heavy beats. Although it was only attuned to Gu Shijio, it was a deadly curse to the python. It lost complete control of its body, and all of its scales opened up in a defensive manner. It wanted to shriek for help, but no sound came out. "Stop! Stop it! Stop playing!" The lady in green called out loud. She then rushed towards the young man in an attempt to remove the flute from his hand. With a leap, the young man steadied himself on a tree. He decided to change the tune. It started out dull, but the intensity slowly built up as he played on. As soon as the lady in green heard the melody, she became very still. Soon, she began dancing uncontrollably. The lady in green was a stunning beauty. She danced seductively in a very sexy and enticing manner. She removed her clothing piece by piece and slowly stripped down to her underwear. It was all very sexually attractive. The way she danced was like a stripper from the modern era, only wilder. Dihao felt awkward watching the scene. As a child, he knew he should not be looking at inappropriate scenes involving adult elements. However, he was even more worried that he might miss out on any key information if he stopped looking. With the maturity of an adult, he convinced himself that the scene was not a big deal. Therefore, Dihao contained his awkwardness and continued watching. In his vision, Gu Shijio could be seen leaning back on a tree while being entertained by the latter's sexy moves. The giant python and the lady were dancing and slowly got closer and closer together. The giant python then spiraled to the ground and shrunk its body to about 10 feet long. It made a swoop at the lady and pinned her down on the ground. Enticingly, it slowly separated the lattice legs, so its tail could linger its way into her private part. Gu Shijio was surprised by the plot twist. She stood up straight to see it better, but a blindfold immediately covered her eyes. That action rendered her speechless. Right at that moment, the young man started playing the melody differently, pleasantly. The soothing tune was a balm for her agitated nerves. The melody was so loud that it managed to block out any other noise. Gu Shijio wanted to take the blindfold away, but the young man's playful tease changed her mind. Would you like to see? This adult imagery is nothing like you have seen before. I can take the blindfold off if you want so that we can both enjoy the show together. Gu Shijio remained quiet. She stood frozen and decided to keep the blindfold on. "Sister," a loud and brusque man could be heard calling out loud from afar. Gu Shijio could clearly hear quick steps approaching them. "Stop it! Stop! Damn it, make it stop!" Gu Shijio pulled the blindfold away and saw a few men. The leader was a man with heavy brocades of a dark golden shade. His elegant outfit was a contrast to his deep, hoarse voice. Gu Shijio recognized the man. He was the king of the Monster Kingdom. The other people were probably his men. As soon as the Monster King approached, he launched a strike at the snake in an attempt to separate the naked woman from its grasp. The snake let out a sharp cry and became even more closely entwined with the woman. Its muscles tightened, thus squeezing the woman even more with its body almost to the point of suffocation. All of the men were confused, unsure if they should look away or stay focused on the snake. "Stay away, all of you!" The Monster King was furious. Chapter 2790. Until her last breath, the Monster King's men stayed away from the feud as instructed. Meanwhile, the Monster King retrieved a black rope out of nowhere and aimed the twisting cord at the python. He wanted to pull the python away from the woman. With his strength and level of kung fu, he was able to lift even the heaviest kind of load. Pulling the snake away should have been an easy matter. Indeed, he was able to pull the snake away from the ground, along with the woman that it desperately tried to mate with. The woman and the snake appeared to move in an arc across the air before taking a hard fall on the ground again. Nonetheless, their bodies were still inextricably intertwined. The woman let out a hoarse cry while slowly losing consciousness. "Feng Jia, what are you doing? Separate them now," the Monster King demanded with cries of anger. The young man kept his composure and calmly replied, "My king, I am here to arrest the murderer who is responsible for the death of 18 girls. I'm only doing what I have promised to do." Anger surged up among the two people. "I asked you to catch the murderer, not to step aside while the princess is helplessly raped. Did you ask the python to assault the princess? Don't you try to talk yourself out of this. I saw you commanding the python with your flute. The python belongs to your sister. She asked the python to attack me first, and the gentleman stepped in to help," Gu Shijio interrupted. The Monster King carefully studied Gu Shijio, but did not recognize her. "Who is this hideous woman?" He began to lose his temper and added, "Feng Jia, I do not care whose python this is. Separate them now." Feng Jia folded his arms together and said, "No can do. Only the python's master can command it." He then looked at the Monster King sternly in the eye. "My king, can't you tell what python this is?" After a pause, the Monster King defended himself. "Of course I can. The python is evil. It only answers to its master, and its master is you." Feng Jia patiently explained, "What I am doing is confusing the python so it cannot recognize its master temporarily. I do not have the power to command it." He took another look at the woman. "You seem to like your pet a lot, so much so that you are not willing to let go of it from your arms." The woman was lying naked on the ground. There were some obvious bloodstains between her thighs by now. She lost control of her body under the influence of the flute, thus losing the ability to command the python. But as soon as the melody stopped, her consciousness immediately returned. Utterly ashamed, she did not know how to face her brother, so she decided to play dead. Never had she thought that the young man could see through her little trick. Taking the python as a pet was strictly prohibited, so she was too afraid to admit that the python belonged to her. However, she also knew very well that once the python started mating, it would keep on penetrating her until her last breath. It would only stop when its master asked it to stop. If she refused to admit it, she would eventually die of exhaustion, and her soul would be crushed in the python's jaws. Therefore, in this matter of life and death, she realized she could not be stubborn any longer. Determined, she gave the python's head a hard slap. "Keep off me." She thought that the python was able to recognize her voice as the flute was no longer playing. Therefore, it should be able to think and respond to her request. But surprisingly, the python only answered to her command and not her voice. The hard slap had unleashed the python's inner beast even more, thus speeding up the movement of its tail. The lady let out a wail before quickly curling her body into a ball. The deep penetration had severely torn the lattice flesh and put her in much agony. However, the sight of blood excited the python even more, so it penetrated with an even stronger and faster rhythm. Pale and drawn, the woman could no longer care about her image. She cast a spell and created a wisp of black, skull-like smoke from the tip of her fingers. She then flicked the wisp of smoke into the python's wide-open mouth and commanded, "Qing Bai, keep out now." The spell was obviously used to control the python. Instantly, The python tensed up its muscles and untangled the woman from its body, though unwillingly. At this point, the Monster King could no longer defend his sister. What a shame. Chapter 2791. The creator of a universe, he offered the naked princess an overcoat made of crane feathers. Her body was still twitching uncontrollably on the ground due to the intensity of the pain she had to experience. She could not even stand on her own, so the Monster King had to bend down and carry her in his arms before leaving. Are you trying to take her away so easily? Feng Jia scornfully questioned. The Monster King stopped walking and glanced back at Feng Jia with an unrelenting look. What more do you want? You have promised the people that once we found the murderer of the missing girls, he or she will be punished publicly by dismembering the murderer's body. Now that we have the murderer, I am wondering when you will punish the princess. The Monster King looked uncomfortable. I know exactly what to do, so there is no need for your concern. Brother, this couple has made some evil plots against me. Please, get revenge for me, brother. The woman pleaded with her brother. Brother, do not let them go. We have to uphold the reputation of our royal family. The Monster King was inspired to kill. His sister was right. In order to protect the name of his family, the couple had to die. Take them, he commanded. All of his men quickly gathered around the two outsiders. The Monster King's facial expression darkened. These people have the audacity to belittle the royalty of the Monster Kingdom. Cease them. However, a sudden voice interrupted him. Yao Xingye, how have you been doing? Much to his surprise, he looked around and saw the hideous woman under the tree. She was no longer her mundane self. Instead, streaks of brilliance started surrounding her body and slowly stripping away her disguise. When the light faded, a beautiful woman in a green magic dress was standing under the tree. There was an emerald magic wand in her hand. The Monster King was utterly shocked. She was the creator of the universe. He once saw Gu Shijio from afar when he visited the valley. She looked exactly the same as she wore the same outfit. The Monster King was dumbstruck, and so were his men. At this very moment, Gu Zijia's aura was extremely intimidating, unlike before. She did not look anything like the woman they had seen earlier. Feng Jia was shocked as well. He was about to play his flute to defend them, but seeing Gu Shijio changed his mind. My divine lord! The Monster King knelt along with his men. Gu Shijio heaved a sigh of relief. Her kung fu was already depleting, but the look in her eyes remained murderous. She could tell that the Monster King wanted her and Feng Jia dead just moments ago. His spiritual power was almost at the level of a great deity. Furthermore, all of his men were among the most powerful and experienced fighters in the Monster Kingdom. Even with Feng Jia's help, their combined strength would not be sufficient to fight them off. They might even die here in the wild. Fortunately for Gu Shijio, death would never truly dawn on her. Her physical body might not survive, but her soul would remain. Nonetheless, she would need at least a decade to create a new body from elementary particles. Time was her only concern right now, and there was not much of it left for her. She had no choice but to reveal her true self. Fortunately, the Monster King was indeed intimidated. None of his men dared to take any moves. Then, Gu Shijio took a look at the prostrate figure on the ground and asked, How do you plan to deal with your sister? The Monster King stammered, About that. Panic, cold sweats started breaking out on his forehead. He was a loving brother who doted on his sister. Never had he thought that his beloved sister would become involved in such a terrible mistake. In recent years, many girls had lost their virginity and eventually their lives to an unknown murderous creature. Some of these victims were the common people of the Monster Kingdom. Some were even the daughters belonging to noble families. 2 cabinet ministers had also lost their beloved daughters to the murderer. Hence, the death toll had caused great alarm to the people. The Monster King had sent out many of his men to investigate the matter, but the case remained unsolved. Chapter 2792. Even I have become your tool. Royal notices were posted and placed all over the kingdom in hopes that someone would take the initiative to solve the case. 3 days later, a man came volunteering. He was Feng Jiai. Feng Jiai went to see the Monster King in secret, so the princess knew nothing about this man. He promised that he would solve the case in 7 days, but he only took 5 days to find the murderer. He intended to expose her in the glare of the public eye. Luckily, the Monster King only brought his servants with him. The victims' families were not notified about the incident yet, so he wanted to silence the witnesses by killing them off. Little did he know that one of the witnesses was actually the creator of the universe. Fake. She is a fake. The princess suddenly called out loud. Qingbai almost killed her just now. Without Feng Jiai, she would already be dead. How could the creator of the universe be so easily defeated by a venomous python? She is an imposter. She is surely a fake. The Monster Kingdom was not ready to give up their princess. Hence, she needed to convince everyone that Gu Shijio was an imposter. As expected, the Monster King lowered his head and asked his sister quietly, "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." The Monster King gave Gu Shijio a murderous look. There is a death penalty to anyone who impersonates the creator of the universe. As the Monster King was not quite sure that she was really an imposter, he tried to be polite first. He wanted to challenge her to a duel so that he could tell if she was really as powerful as he had heard. Suddenly, he heard a collection of footsteps closing in. Where is the murderer? Damn it, we finally have the murderer. I'm going to tear the murderer into pieces. They were chants for the death of the murderer. These were the people of the Monster Kingdom and also the families of the victims. The cabinet ministers were also there among the crowd. They caught Gu Shijio standing at the side and were dumbstruck. The 2 cabinet ministers' eyes opened wide in shock. The divine creator of the universe is here. I hereby bow before you, Divine Lord. They instantly fell to their knees. Divine Lord, I did not know that you are here. Divine Lord, my daughter died a tragic death. Please help us. Rest assured that the murderer is caught since we have the Divine Lord here with us. That is right. Mr. Feng once told us that the melody was a signal. When the melody was played, it also meant that the murderer was arrested. So, where's the murderer? The crowd effervesced with frustration. With a smile, Feng Jiai looked at the Monster King and said, "My king, the venomous python was misused by your sister to harm the innocent. You have seen it all. The devil venomous python is also prohibited in all of the 6 worlds. The owner has to be sentenced to death. Will you give the people a proper explanation of the situation?" The Monster King felt all hope was lost. When the truth was exposed in the public eye, there was no way he could help his sister. He took a look at Gu Shijio, who was standing in the distance, surrounded by a layer of divine aura. An imposter could have easily faked her looks, but the divine aura of the creator of the universe could not have been imitated. She was indeed the almighty creator of the universe. Determined, he tossed the woman on the ground and furiously said, "Yao Tingting, look what you've done. Take her down. We shall dismember her to death." Tranquility had once again returned to the wilderness when everyone left. Before the Monster King left, he invited Gu Shijio to the Monster Palace as a guest, but his invitation was turned down immediately. Gu Shijio had things to attend to. The Monster King did not push it any further and quickly left. In the end, Gu Shijio and Feng Jiai were the only ones left in the wild. Gu Shijio sat on top of a stone and looked at him condescendingly. "The plan was great. Even I have become your tool." Chapter 2793. Don't worry, I am not sending you away. Gu Shijio was smart enough to link everything that happened together in an instant. This man must have noticed that the princess was the culprit for a while now. Knowing that she would most likely be interested in handsome men, he needed to trigger her jealousy by doing things that were completely out of her expectation. Back in the restaurant, he purposely showed his kindness to the woman who was seen as hideous by the public. The princess had, as expected, become utterly jealous and thus initiated a series of brutal remarks and actions. Feng Jai knew very well that everything was going as he planned, so he notified the victims' families in advance. The Monster King was not the only one who had received the invitation. The princess needed to be exposed in the eyes of the public and punished in a way that she deserved. Gu Shizhou studied Feng Jai for a while and was impressed by his perception and wit, even though he was only a young man. "I am sorry," Feng Jai suddenly apologized. Gu Shizhou cleared her throat to dissolve the awkwardness. Now that he had apologized, she should let the matter go. After all, the princess deserved it. A sudden grasp by her wrist interrupted her. Baffled, she had never encountered such disrespect in her life. She wanted to push his hand away, but he pulled her toward him instead. "This is not the place to talk. Follow me." Soon, Gu Zijia's vision turned black. The man had already initiated the ground drilling technique. Gu Shizhou was still perplexed. "What are you doing?" "Don't worry. I'm not going to send you away." Feng Jai did not look back and continued drilling. Gu Shizhou knew that he was not strong enough to hurt her. Stirred by curiosity, she decided to let him guide the way. After a moment, Gu Shizhou noticed that something was not quite right. Usually, ground drillings would only cover a relatively short distance. One would usually use it for 100 miles at most. Under normal circumstances, one would need to head back up to catch a breath every hour. Not even a great deity's physique could handle the harsh underground conditions. However, Feng Jai was able to use the ground drilling technique for over 6 hours straight without stopping for a rest. Also, his speed was impressive. Gu Shizhou assumed that they had both traveled for at least 600 miles in total. Fortunately, Gu Shizhou was the creator of the universe. Even with her power being greatly depleted, ground drilling would not pose any danger to her. She was able to survive all day being underground. However, the young man was obviously not as strong as her. How did he manage to survive all day? Icy peaks and snow-capped mountains rose up from the land amid the white snow. From where they stood, they could see a glacier that had been around since forever. She looked up and was impressed by the mighty mountain that had its icy summit above the clouds. Gu Shizhou did not expect to see snow as soon as they resurfaced. At the same time, cold winds blew by, swirling snowflakes in the air. She could not help but shudder in the cold. For the first time, she thought that her clothes might be a little too thin for the weather. She took a look at Feng Jai. His clothes were obviously not made for the cold, but he did not seem to be bothered. There he stood, tall and straight, seemingly unconcerned by the icy peaks and the brutal winter winds. He opened up an umbrella to shelter her from the snow. "Are you feeling cold?" He fixed his eyes on her pale white face as he asked her. Gu Shizhou took a deep breath and rubbed her numb hands together for warmth. "I'm not afraid of the cold. Why did you take us here?" She steadied herself and calmly remarked. Feng Jai sized her up before continuing. "If I am not mistaken, your spiritual power is less than the strength of a golden immortal now. Why do you have to keep playing tough?" Astonished, Gu Shizhou looked at him with a rather spurious smile. Underneath her sleeves, she quietly cast a spell on her fingertips. So, if something went wrong, she could easily escape. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.